Okay. Well, good morning and welcome to our second infrastructure working group meeting. We are holding these work group meetings focused around infrastructure in support of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation will, as proposed, would require fleets to transition to zero-emission trucks. And coupled with the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, this rulemaking will make pivotal contributions to achieving health-based air quality standards, reducing near roadway exposure to transportation emissions and for communities burdened by diesel toxic air contaminants, and reaching our climate change emission reduction goals. In the course of developing this regulation, issues have been coming up around the infrastructure needs for this transition. We've held a forum on infrastructure, and we've taken comments at a number of workshops and work group meetings in support of the regulatory development. And from that, it's clear that we need a platform for a more focused conversation about infrastructure, where we can spend more time hearing from stakeholders about their concerns and questions, and bring in our partner agencies to have a complete conversation about what's happening in the state to support ZEB infrastructure. The purpose of this work group meeting is primarily intended to inform and support the Advanced Clean Fleets rulemaking, but we also want to foster dialogue between stakeholders about infrastructure issues and solutions broadly. We want to connect the work of the Advanced Clean Fleets rulemaking with the important work of our sister agencies, and we want to identify actions and ongoing discussions that will support the transition to ZEBs. The format is a bit different. Like our first meeting, we've asked participants to identify if they'd like to be in a speaking role during the meeting. We've selected around 30 participants, a bit more than that today, to be in that speaking role. And we're looking forward to a robust and constructive conversation about the topics on our agenda. We invite all attendees to participate via the Q&A chat box. And if you were selected to be a work group member today, if you weren't selected to be a work group member today, it may be because more than one person in your organization applied to be a panelist, or you identified an area of interest that didn't match today's topic as much as it does a different meeting, or we had broad representation from that sector already. Either way, your voice is important to us, and we welcome your input through the Q&A chat box, and we can discuss setting up one-on-one meetings if needed. We're recording today's meeting. Is that true? Yes, we are. We will post these to our YouTube channel when the recording is ready. We're going to start off today with a few short presentations from our partner agencies about the programs they administer, and to help introduce the agency team, and we'll run through quick introductions of the work group panelists once we're done with that. Then we'll work through the topics on our agenda. Finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of what we heard throughout the morning and what next steps are on the table. Today's topic is hydrogen, and we want to talk through issues related to hydrogen production and ramping up station development. Sorry, I have the wrong agenda in front of me. And so we'll work through those topic areas one by one. We want to be careful, however, that we don't stray too far from the hydrogen topic. We have ahead of us electricity and grid issues and cost and funding in January. And it may be hard to stay out of those areas, but please understand if I interrupt and push these topics off to the future meetings to make sure we can focus on hydrogen today. We're here to listen, to facilitate conversation, and to work through issues. I hope we can avoid prepared remarks and presentations and any non-constructive dialogue. And as part of facilitating dialogue, please don't be surprised if we have follow-up questions. So before we start, I want to extend my thanks to our partner agencies for joining us today, presenting and being a part of this conversation. I want to thank our work group members for offering to be a part of this dialogue, and thank you to all of our participants for contributing to this conversation. With that, I'd like to introduce the CARB team and our state agency participants. I'm going to have to pull up my list. We have Leslie Goodbody, who's been facilitating and organizing this set of meetings. Catherine Garrison, who has been our right-hand person on pulling this all together. Wente Yin is our tech support on this. Thank you so much for helping us make all this work. And let's see, I know that Andrew Martinez, who has been our hydrogen expert at CARB for a number of years, is here with us. Let's see, I can't see everybody that's Rayed Mahdi has been at the forefront of establishing hydrogen stations with our testing program within CARB. And Jacob Englander is here from our LCFS program, our low carbon fuel standard program. And am I missing any other CARB folks? Okay. And we have Tyson Eckerly and Gia Ecobiz from GO-Biz, Elizabeth John from CEC, and I believe we have a CPUC representative, Michael, is that right? Leslie?
Michael Traux, I think that's how his name is pronounced, and he has been having issues getting in. He might be in on the phone, I'm hoping.
Okay, sounds good. Have I missed out any of our state partners? Okay. With that, I would like to introduce Tyson from GO-Biz to give a presentation on the work that they do to support our transition to zero emission and in particular hydrogen.
Right. Well, thanks, Annalise, and thank you all for joining today. And so I'll just be very brief, but like in a nutshell, what GO-Biz, what we do is we're here to help solve problems and help you be successful in the marketplace. And so that goes from, coordinating across all the state agencies to make sure the policies are in alignment to help make your investments work and thrive, and all the way down to the ground level, with on the ground permit assistance, working with communities to make sure that they understand that hydrogen is not something to be scared of, but something that to be embraced with all the codes and standards around it. And so we have a growing team that we've been focused on hydrogen for a number of years. We've learned a lot through the light duty sector, and I think the medium and heavy duty sector offer unique opportunities, and we can build on those lessons learned in the light duty sector that has been learned across all the state agencies and with all our industry partners, and through the various groups that are represented here today. And so my colleague Gia will talk a little bit later about some of the federal initiatives, but I think a lot of you know us from that, and so we've been very excited to work in the space and excited to see where it's going. And then just kind of, keeping in mind, there's a lot of stuff on the horizon that we're very excited about as well. Not only the federal money, but all the California Comeback Plan money. There's a lot of investment going in. And so it behooves us all to get it right, to make sure that we're opening up as many opportunities for fleets as possible to have a decision to make between the technologies to figure out, it's based on what is best for your fleet application and not what's just available in the marketplace. And so that's where we hope to go. So thanks for everybody. And then Annalise, I'll hand it back to you. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Tyson. I'd like to introduce Elizabeth John from the CEC.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. So for the CEC, for hydrogen refueling infrastructure, Assembly Bill 8 directs the CEC to allocate $20 million annually from the Clean Transportation Program toward hydrogen refueling stations until there are at least 100 publicly available stations in California. In addition, AB8 requires annual review and reporting by the CEC and California Air Resources Board. So excited to announce that on Monday, CEC staff will publish this year's Joint Agency Staff Report on Assembly Bill 8, which is the 7th such report, and describes the investment, planning, development, and use of hydrogen refueling stations to support fuel cell electric vehicles in California. And so some of the highlights of the report include California anticipates reaching 100 stations by the end of 2023. And as of today, 53 stations are open retail in California. with the Clean Transportation Program allocating funding to 156 stations and the private sector announcing an additional 23 privately funded stations, the state expects up to 179 stations by 2026. In addition, the $1.16 billion in one-time funding from this year's California budget is anticipated to help allow the CEC to reach the 200 station goal. And these stations support the almost 8,500 fuel cell electric vehicles that have been sold or leased in California as of the end of the third quarter of 2020. Additionally, we have found that station development time has decreased over time, now taking about 30 months to become open retail after the CEC has approved funding to the station. Not only do we have more stations coming online faster, but the average daily hydrogen dispensed has increased each year, along with the cumulative light-duty FCEV sales or leases in California. Additionally, while station capacity is increasing, the cost per station is declining. We have seen the cost per station drop from about 1.8 to 2.3 million per station to between 800,000 and 1.8 million per station. So this trend of station cost decreasing while station capacity is increasing demonstrates how the Clean Transportation Program public dollars are going further than they once were. And then for MDHD specifically, to date, the CEC has awarded nearly $35 million in funding to support medium and heavy duty hydrogen refueling infrastructure for applications in the freight and transit industries. In one example, the CEC partnered with the California Air Resources Board on its first ever joint solicitation for zero-emission drayage truck and infrastructure pilot projects. And this solicitation resulted in an award to the Center for Transportation and the Environment, who will operate 30 Hyundai hydrogen fuel cell Class 8 trucks at the Port of Oakland and as far north as Bakersfield, with a new hydrogen station being constructed on East Bay Municipal Utilities District property. And so lastly, I would like to quickly discuss our new Energized commercial vehicle projects, which is set to release its first round of funding in January. Energized will have a funding lane designed for applicants that intend to develop public or private hydrogen infrastructure projects for commercial MDHD vehicles. And the lane is slated to receive 30% of funding from the first 50 million, which is about 14 million. And I'll add that the first 50 million is not the full amount of funding we intend to include in Energize. So the Energize hydrogen lane is planning on accepting applications in Q2 of 2022, and applications will be judged on a competitive basis based on criteria designed by the Energize staff. There is a cap of $2 million for this lane, and with reimbursement for 50% of hardware or software costs incurred. And if meeting Jumpstart lane equity criteria, which is another funding lane, we can provide up to a cap of $3 million with 75% of hardware, software, eligible soft costs incurred and reimbursed. So I encourage you to look out for the Energy project and engage in the Energize process. And I'll stop there, but we can talk more about Energize later. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we get Michael in?
I am trying. Let's just keep moving and maybe we'll have an opportunity. Hang on. I can hear everyone now, but that was entered as a participant automated. I'll try to unmute and talk, but it might. All right, I'm going to ask him to send his phone number, and maybe Wente will look for that in the hand raisers. So let's
go ahead and have the federal update from Gia Ecobiz. And Kathy, if you can share the slides.
Great. Thank you, Annalisa. Thanks everybody for being here. I see the slides now. Looks like we're good to go. So we'll just spend a handful of minutes here on a really brief update. Obviously, there's a lot of detail behind these kind of high level points that I'm going to share with everyone. And so we can certainly dig into it at another time. But let's just run through a couple of the highlights. So it was signed, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was signed last month, almost exactly a month ago. And it includes 1.2 trillion in investments, federal investments for infrastructure programs, as well as 65 billion within that for power infrastructure. In that package, 9.5 billion is included for clean hydrogen specific initiatives and activities. And I'll run through kind of how that money is broken down in just a moment here. But it's worth noting that that hydrogen fueling infrastructure is also an eligible expense in the fueling infrastructure grant program. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's just to say that there are other places, many other places where hydrogen is included, but not specifically called out as kind of a line item like this 9.5 billion. Next slide, please. Okay, so of the 9.5 billion, 8 billion over 5 years will be for regional clean hydrogen hubs. And I have a feeling that many on the call today and the work group members are well aware of this. So DOE will support the development of at least 4 regional clean hydrogen hubs. And I've kind of italicized at least there because we're hearing that it's likely more, could be many more, but it kind of remains to be seen there how that's going to roll out. There are a number of parameters for what the different hubs will entail, but this just to say here that there are different kinds of diversity aspects that DOE will be looking for when they award these. So feedstock diversity, end use diversity, geographic diversity, and then in the natural gas producing regions as well. So we can talk more if people have questions about, the specifics there. But the next is 1 billion over 5 years for clean hydrogen electrolysis program. And the goal there would be to, have research and development demonstration happening to get electrolytic hydrogen to less than $2 per kilogram in just 4 years from now by 2026. So that's that piece. And then finally here, the 500 million over 5 years for clean hydrogen manufacturing and recycling, and DOE will be awarding multi-year funding there for RD&D projects. Next slide, please. Additionally, there's a few other items here. One is a national clean hydrogen strategy and roadmap, and DOE is targeting May 15th to have that delivered. There's the clean hydrogen research and development. This is a reauthorization for clean hydrogen RD&D activities at DOE. And there's, several goals, a couple of goals under that to achieve, but kind of reauthorizing that piece. And finally, it also defines clean hydrogen as hydrogen produced with carbon intensity that's equal to or less than $2 per kilogram of CO2 equivalent per 1 kilogram of hydrogen produced. Next slide, please. I'm also going to just share a little bit about the Department of Energy Hydrogen Shot. There's a series of Earth Shot initiatives, and the Hydrogen Shot was the first one. And it's seeking to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen by 80% to $1 per kilogram within 1 decade. So the idea here is that seeing the potential for at least a 5-fold increase in the use of clean hydrogen. And you can see there the bullet below just some estimates around what that might mean in terms of, 140 billion in revenue, 700,000 jobs by 2030, 16% carbon dioxide emission reduction by 2050. And that's of course just one estimate there, but significant. And then one of the first things that happened, there was a summit that happened earlier this year. And shortly thereafter, DOE released a request for information, which ran from June 7th to July 7th of this past year, to really understand kind of how to enable low cost clean hydrogen at scale. And so I want to share one slide that just has kind of some high level results from that. Next slide, please. We won't go into too much detail here, and this comes directly out of DOE's slide deck, so you can look on on the energy.gov website and find this. But there were nearly 200 responses that were received, and you can see here the darker blue areas. So California, Washington, Texas sort of had the highest response rate in terms of number of responses, but really pretty good response throughout the whole country, and looking at different potential end uses, different feedstocks, stakeholders, new and innovative ideas. And then the image on the right shows how they've broken down regional clusters and the various highlights about geographic factors, natural resources, where there is seeing opportunity for job growth. And so it's fun to dig into a little bit more if you have more time. It's quite a long slide deck, and there's a lot of interesting information in there. Next. So the hydrogen shot kind of next steps looks like they're going to continue to evaluate RFI responses. There'll be more webinars. That deck came from one presentation. There'll be more of those, conducting a series of workshops, and then looking at, analyzing different pathway studies. So just sort of getting going, still gathering information, but it will be interesting to continue to watch that as we go forward. And next slide, I think that's the last slide. We know we're tracking this. We are learning as things are evolving as well. So if you have questions or you want to connect, please feel free to reach out to Tyson or to me or to both of us, and we'll be happy to engage with you on this. Thank you. Back to you, Annalisa.
Thanks, Gia. So the next, actually, are we ready with CPUC with Michael? It doesn't sound like it. Okay, so our next item is we're going to conduct an exercise to kind of set the stage for what's top of mind for folks. We're going to conduct a word cloud, and Catherine is going to run us through that. Catherine, would you like to walk us through how the word cloud works?
Yes, thank you so much, Annalisa. So we're going to build upon what we used last week. Annalisa, when she has us talk about infrastructure, she grounds us by saying, hey, what keeps fleets up at night? We're asking them to do a lot of activities. What keeps them up at night? And what we were hoping to do today is do a word cloud that what keeps you up at night regarding hydrogen. So we're going to use the Poll Everywhere software, and let me share my screen, and it'll contain some information about how to do that. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to give you a tip to please only use at most 2 words, and you can use the connector by the underscore to connect 2 words. Otherwise, word cloud will just see it as 1 word. And also, if you could use a singular form. At our last work group meeting, some folks said costs and the other people said cost. And so we weren't able to, get that pulse. So if you could join by phone, on here on the screen, you can text 22333. And then once you put in that number, and then you put in Crystal Laza 824, that would be great. And so go ahead and type in there what you see that keeps you up at night. We're waiting for people to connect. Just a moment, Annalisa. Oh, we have our first words. Oh, we're getting them in by gangbusters now. We see availability, a large one. Cost is large. Reliability. We're also getting infrastructure, fueling stations, delivery. Tesla, wonder what that means. Tesla source, premature, reliability. Annalisa, is there something that's sticking out to you?
Well, certainly cost, availability, and reliability. We'll let this play out for a minute. Supply.
Proximity is a new one I saw. Maintenance.
Range. Build out.
Location. Explosive hazards. Environmental. Missing out. No trucks was an interesting one I saw.
Right. Blue-gray fuel. Blue-gray fossil fuel.
Production GHG. Scheduling drivers.
Let's give this another 30 seconds or so.
A 3070. I wonder if maybe our panelists will dig into what that means.
Okay.
Thank you.
See if we can, yeah. And if you can take a screenshot of that, it certainly seems like cost was a recurring concern. Availability and reliability, those are consistent with what we heard for electric infrastructure as well. And a lot of diversity in the concerns. So I'm hoping today's conversations and questions and comments will help kind of tease out some of those issues, those topics, and maybe we can answer some of them, and maybe we can figure out what other additional dialogue needs to take place or actions to help answer some of those concerns. Okay. So we're going to move now into conversation on our topic areas. And we'd like to have folks that are on the panel raise their hands to be called on. We're going to take a sort of first hands up first to talk, but if you've talked before, we may pass you over the second or third time to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk, and then come back to you if we have time. And we will track what's happening in the Q&A box. We have staff that are trying to keep up with answering those questions live. If there's a theme coming up in the Q&As, we'll bring that into the verbal conversation, and we'll work from there. So let's see. Catherine, can you share the agenda to the screen?
Yes, just a moment. We're saving the word cloud results.
And I am prepared to tee up the first part of the conversation, and then pass it off a little bit. So should I get started while Kathy's working on that?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, so the very first topic that we're planning on talking about is the station location planning and corridor planning. And I wanted to just give folks in the audience just an update and a little bit of a history where we are at in terms of hydrogen refueling on the heavy duty side of things, sort of set the stage. Basically, and a lot of folks on this call realize that refueling, or maybe not, refueling heavy duty hydrogen is not new at all. People have been refueling transit buses for a number of years. A number of folks on the call have developed hydrogen stations for transit buses. There's a fueling standard in place. And so while it's not new, I guess the best part of all of the investments that have been made recently in transit bus refueling is helping to refine the technology. It's helping to get the costs down by greater production of the equipment associated with it. It's the work done of late with a couple of grants that CARB has funded for pilot projects has helped to really increase the fueling times, increase the scale of the station. We're doing back-to-back fuelings in transit buses, 2 at a time, sometimes under 10 minutes. And so the advancements of late have been very important and significant. That said, hydrogen refueling for transit buses is behind the fence. It's at the depot. It's not open to the public. And the fueling protocol and needs for hydrogen transit buses is at the lower pressure of 350 bar. So a lot of times people ask, well, can we share fueling infrastructure with trucks and others? And it's just, this isn't necessarily this isn't really a feasible thing if we're talking about broad commercialization of hydrogen refueling for trucks. So it works for transit because they have ample storage space on the roof. It's less expensive to refuel at 350 bar. So the technology is a little bit less mature when it comes to fueling trucks because they don't have as much storage capacity on board. And because of that, they will probably, in many instances, require a higher pressure refueling. They have larger storage systems. And so we are in the early stages of some of the project that Elizabeth said that they are funding right now with their demonstration on hydrogen refueling for trucks. We are demonstrating 700 bar refueling. And for those of you on the call, 700 bar means 10,000 pounds per 10,000 pounds per square inch. So this is where the focus of this meeting today is focusing on the need for public refueling of hydrogen for hydrogen trucks, and the discussion will go into whether or not 700 bar is the right pressure or not. But this is still being worked out, but it's really important work that a lot of the stakeholders on the call are doing right now. And if Elizabeth wants to chime in and speak a little bit more about, I know she covered it pretty well, but if there's anything you guys want to add about what is going on with the Energy Commission, that's great. If not, I was hoping that James Cast is on the call from Toyota. James, are you on the call? I don't even recall.
I am. Do you hear me now?
Yes. Hey, Elizabeth,
Perfect.
Is that okay to pass the baton to James?
Yes, absolutely.
So James is going to talk about the fuel cell electric truck vision document that the OEMs have been collaborating on with the California Fuel Cell Partnership.
Of course. Thank you very much there, Leslie, and appreciate the time to speak a little bit today. So I know I have a lot of topics, so I won't go in much detail, and I don't plan to share really any slides either. But I just wanted to help frame the concept of the industry collaboration that's being led through the Fuel Cell Partnership that first started with the heavy-duty fuel cell electric truck vision, and then of course leading on to some future endeavors as well. And so many of you should have seen, a number of months ago now, earlier this year, the publication of that document. It's about 20 pages and actually very similar to some of the light duty and also the bus transit vision documents, which is really just trying to set the stage for how not only the industry, but also the policymakers, academia, those fleet operators can come together to really accelerate the momentum in the heavy duty space. And of course, there was a strong focus on Class 8, but it includes really everything medium and heavy duty and on road of that transit, and the infrastructure being a big piece of that, which I think is why we're really focused on today. So if you're looking at how to decarbonize these sectors and just noting how essential that the fuel cell electric truck powertrain will be to help reach these ultimate goals of carbon neutrality and 100% vehicles in 2035 in the ports, 2045 in the entire state, we just wanted to kind of set the beginning of a roadmap. And I think one of the key metrics in there and key figures in there was really showing how you can sprint to 2025, build out those initial hubs in those port areas, especially in SoCal, in the San Pedro ports and in the NorCal ports as well, up in the Bay Area, and start to kind of grow those hubs. You should go from dredge, getting into regional haul, and eventually as you get closer to 2035, how you kind of mock up that broader network, not only in California, but connecting to those other Western states, because you really have to enable a broader Western region to actually get closer to, broader regional haul and long haul trucking. It doesn't all just stay within the state. And using these truck stops and that network really as a proxy for how this could actually work and really outline meeting the needs of these truckers and meeting the needs of that demand. So again, I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. I could probably speak, obviously for a number of times here for the broader vision, but maybe I'll pause there and open it up for any other comments or questions or pass to the next panelist.
Thank you. I think it would be good for us to run through ask the panelists to introduce themselves really quickly, and then we'll go to those who have their hands raised. Trying to think the best way to go through this efficiently. Why don't I call, I'm going to run down the attendee list really quick. Eddie Phillips.
Hi, thanks, Annalisa. Eddie Phillips, BNSF Railway. Do you want us just to introduce now, or?
Yeah, and then I'll come right back to you for comments. And Tim Sassine.
Hi, yeah, Tim Sassine, Market Development Manager for the US for Ballard Power Systems.
Great. David Bleckman.
Good morning, everyone. David Blechman. I'm a professor at Cal State LA. We operate hydrogen with the workforce development. Thank you. Thank you.
Pete Montero.
Morning. Pete Montero, Senior Manager for Advanced Product Planning in the Hyundai American Technical Center Commercial Vehicle Development Team.
Thank you. Stephen Davis.
Stephen Davis, Robert V. Jensen. We're developing the hydrogen truck station in Fresno, California.
And Aravind Kilas. Sorry to.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, good to see familiar faces again. Arvind Kailas of Volvo Group North America, and I'm the Advanced Technology Policy Director, and I'm based out of Southern California. Thank you.
And Ashish Bhakta.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon. Ashish Bhakta, Business Development Manager for the Zero Emission Solutions at Trillium. We're about to build our third hydrogen fueling station for transit, and we're part of the Love's company, family of companies, who has 570 travel centers across the country. So looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today.
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize in advance for anybody's names that I mispronounced. Aiden Man.
Oh, that's okay. It happens all the time. Aiden Manicherry with CTE. We marry opportunities for transitions away from fossil fuel dependence for the transportation sector, and I am located in Southern California.
Thank you. Brenner Brophy.
Hi, Brenner Brophy from Plug Power. I'm Vice President of Project Development, and I'm responsible for building Plug's national network of green hydrogen production with a target of 500 tons daily production by 2025.
Thank you. Brian Goldstein.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Goldstein, Executive Director of Energy Independence Now. We are a ZEV advocacy group that focuses on analysis, education and outreach, and advocacy. So we have largely provided a voice for the hydrogen community over the last 20 years because frankly, weren't any other NGOs that were willing to step up and do so. So we've been very active in this market and are really excited about the road ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Eddie Newport.
Hi guys, Eddie here. I'm responsible for all business development and sales activities in North America for Nel Hydrogen. We are actively installing a whole bunch of stations in California currently. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you. Eric Guter.
Hi, I'm Eric Guter, Air Products Vice President of Hydrogen Mobility Solutions. I'm based in Southern California and appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Harry Manazuki.
Yeah, Harry Mamazuka, one of the owners for NorCal Kenworth. We're one of the leading medium and heavy duty truck dealerships in Northern California, and one of the first to construct and implement a zero emissions service work base. So,
thank you. James Dumont.
Hi, good morning. James Dumont with Momentum. We design, develop, and deploy clean technology solutions with a focus on grant funding. We're based in Northern California and operate throughout the state. Thank you.
Thanks. James Cast.
So I think you guys heard from me, but James Cass from Toyota, a hydrogen infrastructure manager based here in SoCal. Thanks all.
Jay? I'm pretty sure it's Jay Keller.
Is this J.L. Kindler?
Yes.
Good morning.
Recognize the picture.
Good morning, J.L. Kindler. I'm the CEO of Waste2H. We offer turnkey solutions for waste conversion into renewable hydrogen. Typical system size produces between 400 kilograms and 3 tons of hydrogen per day. Thank you.
Jed Proctor?
Yeah, hey, good morning. Jed Proctor, Daimler Trucks North America, manage our zero emissions infrastructure and strategy concepts team.
Thank you. J.L. Kindler?
Oh God, I'm sorry. I was not supposed to speak earlier, right? So I'm still J.L. Kindler at Waste2H.
Oh, got it. Okay. Let's see. Jordan Truitt?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Jordan Truitt with Air Liquide Hydrogen Energy. We are a hydrogen producer, and we also design and build fueling equipment. Thank you.
Jose Lopez Gallego?
Hey, good morning. Jose Lopez Gallego. Yes, I am with the company Brusalis. We are doing business development for hydrogen production from renewable natural gas and electrolysis, etc. with a company called Técnicas Reunidas, TR. We are the business, we are the managers, sorry, the manufacturers representative here in the United States and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Davidson?
Hi, I'm Melanie Davidson with San Diego Gas and Electric. I'm the Hydrogen Commercial Development Manager, and I am based in San Diego.
Thank you. Mike Reddick?
Good day, I'm Mike Reddick with Chevron. I'm Hydrogen Business Development on the renewables team with Chevron.
Thank you. Nico Bauckham?
Nico Bauckham, representing the California Fuel Cell Partnership, and I'm the co-author of the document that James described as being the California Fuel Cell Partnership Heavy-Duty Fuel Cell Truck Vision Document for 2035.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Jay Keller.
Hi, Jay Keller. I'm working with the DOE and others on hydrogen safety codes and standards. Largely, I take care of the international framework.
Thank you. Patricio Portillo?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Patricio Portillo with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I lead our clean, medium, and heavy-duty transportation work.
Thank you. Pete Montero?
I think I already introduced myself. I'm with Hyundai American Technical Center.
okay.
I'm Senior Manager for Product Planning.
Thank you. Stephen Davis?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. Teresa Cook?
Thanks, Annalisa. Teresa Cook here in Sacramento on behalf of the California Hydrogen Coalition. We are a state-focused advocacy organization representing station developers, OEMs, and hydrogen producers. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Morris?
Hi, good morning. Tom Morris with Shell. I'm Commercial Manager for Heavy Duty Hydrogen.
Thank you. And Michael? This might be the Michael that we're having technical issues with hearing. Okay. Did I miss anybody? I have to admit, I'm reading off the panelist attendee list and it keeps moving while I'm reading it. So if I missed anybody, please speak up. Okay. I'd like to call on Eddie Phillips.
Thanks, Annalisa.
Topic item.
Thank you. So with regard to station location planning, the way we look at this is for the trade corridors, you have Class 8 tractor trailers that are intrastate or interstate that primarily use the truck stops. But then you have a whole class of trucks that are lower weights, Class 2 through Class 7, that use a lot of the retail fuel stations. And our primary concern for those trucks that are not going to be able to take advantage of private fueling at depots that are going to be using the retail stations, that we have 10,000 retail fuel stations in California. If the advanced clean fleet regulation mandates 10%, the first cut of trucks to be zero emissions, and let's say a percentage of those are going to be battery electric, percentage are going to be hydrogen or some other fuel, that we really are concerned that the availability of the fuel at the retail stations needs to match that percentage of trucks that currently fuels at retail fuel stations. So that might be 250 or 500 public fueling stations distributed throughout California, because a lot of these lower weight trucks, the class 2s through class 6 or 7, don't necessarily utilize the trade corridors. They might be on smaller arteries performing work, especially our trucks. So we're concerned about stranding those assets. We're concerned about not being able to complete the work that needs to be done if the fueling infrastructure is not available. We really would like to see CARB and the CTC and CEC estimate what percentage of the trucks under the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation will be in need of retail hydrogen fuel stations, and marry those up so that the public fueling is not only in terms of location, but availability matches the need. Because what we could see is long lines to fuel your truck, like we saw in the 70s, where you can only fuel on the odd or even days, depending on the last digit of your license plate, where you have 50 trucks queuing on a public highway because they're waiting for the only hydrogen station in the area. And so that's our comment on the station location planning. Thank you.
Do you have a suggestion of how we figure out which fleets are going to need hydrogen fuel? It's sort of a two-part question.
Right.
First, we need to figure out which fleets want to use hydrogen, and then we need to figure out which of those fleets need public stations. Right. Do you have recommendations of how we, I think we absolutely want to do that kind of analysis.
Right. I would recommend, there are other people who are attendees on this workshop. So people who work in the trucking industry, like the California Trucking Association, might be a really good resource for that. I think they have a lot of good data on who their members are, and also people who are following the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation. One of the things that I saw on the ACT on the reporting was that CARB asked what the range of trucks was. So and the problem with that data is that a lot of our trucks, for example, are service vehicles, and I think this applies to many companies, including a lot of the utilities, is that our trucks don't travel a long range, but they have an energy need for 8 to 12 hours or longer, up to 16 hours. So battery electric technology today won't get us through that day. We're going to have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So maybe just, if you can't find other panelists or attendees who can provide the data, perhaps try and solicit information from individual companies to see what their needs are going to be.
Yeah. Thank you. Tim?
Thanks. Yeah, Tim Sessine with Ballard Power Systems. So I would like to echo the comments from James at Toyota. I think looking towards where the commercial fueling stations are now for heavy duty trucks is a good guideline. And moreover, I would like to emphasize that California needs to accept hydrogen as part of its energy mix. We seem to be taking still a wait and see approach. And I think we've seen enough, particularly with the uptake of hydrogen internationally and across the nation, but also with the success within California. We just finished up a 2-year trial at the ports of Long Beach with a Kenworth-based chassis, and fuel cell buses are doing great. The latest AC Transit report actually shows fuel cell electric buses operating per mile more cheaply than the battery electric buses, and with incentives at half the cost of diesel. So the time to doubt hydrogen as a heavy duty fuel is over. And I think we need to use what we know about hydrogen and what it can serve. It can serve long distance and heavy energy uses. So the ports are an obvious location, as you have independent truckers that need to refuel at public stations as opposed to having 1 megawatt chargers at home. That's going to be obviously a useful place for hydrogen. And the 5, 10, and 15 highways are going to be long distance corridors as well. And mapping those out to existing commercial truck stops, I think makes a heck of a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete Montero.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end up sounding somewhat redundant, although I will add just a little bit of added flavor to what previous speakers have mentioned. Obviously, the ports, there's a concentration of vehicles there that make them a natural place to focus on. The other part about the ports is that from the standpoint of the economy, they're a major inlet into the state and into the Western United States. And because of that, they have a significant amount of importance to the fleets. Companies operate those fleets. So that's important to note as well. And I think that that's something that can help to sell, the idea of applying vehicles like this in the ports. Tim from Ballard mentioned the I-10, I-15 corridors. The thing that strikes us at Hyundai is that California, specifically California being such a north-south oriented state, has that kind of orientation to the corridors. You have I-5, you have Highway 99, for example, through the Central Valley. What's kind of interesting about that is that they are different kinds of corridors. I-5 is a corridor that links Northern and Southern California. Highway 99 actually does the same, but it also links population centers in the Central Valley. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I was born in Wasco, California. My dad was a sheep herder in Lost Hills. I went to high school in Fresno, so I know that valley really well. And it's interesting because even though they link together at the north and south ends, they have very different types of traffic. And I think that's something to keep in mind. There are different types of traffic, different types of impacts on the state through the Central Valley there. The other thing to keep in mind is as you travel north and south, you're linking up with major east-west corridors that can help to link California through these advanced technology vehicles with the rest of the Western states and into the Midwest. And those corridors, those I-5 and that I-5 corridor in particular is really important from that standpoint. Obviously, also we have distribution centers that we need to keep in mind as well, where those distribution centers tend to be located as well. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, Nico.
Thank you, Annalisa. Yeah, a few comments in addition to what James mentioned earlier about the planning of corridors and the focus on the existing commercial fueling activities, public ones that is. First of all, I posted a link to the vision document in the chat for those who are not familiar with it, just so you can take a look at it. And there's a map in there, and I want to add a little bit of information to that map. That map obviously is very abstract. It does not reflect all freight corridors and all places where freight moves, including Class 8 trucks and other trucks. We purposely did it this way because of the high level that we were approaching it from. We were looking at a vision, not telling exactly where things were going. And we're talking about station density because there's a lot of work that needs to be done and people to get on the same page with regard to where exactly, even though a focus, it could be the commercial fueling activities already occur. But the trucking industry clearly gave us feedback on the corridors as well. So it's one thing to look at the freight corridors as you see them on major planning maps for state and other organizations, including federal organizations. However, trucks move in a lot of other areas as well. So you cannot forget, for example, about alternative routes. Say, for example, if Donner Pass is closed, where does the freight move? It will take an alternative route. It may even go as far as Las Vegas and then go up north to still get to Reno because they cannot get the freight to the destination. So that's one thing to consider. With that also comes that focusing on California only may not be initially maybe a good thing for drayage, but for freight to move and for fleet operators to work properly and do what they do best is moving freight. They occasionally have or frequently have opportunities to move their freight out of state. And they need to be able to do that, continue to do that. Otherwise, they will not invest as much in the zero emission trucks as they are expected to or regulated to do. So basically, what I'm basically saying for ACT and ACF to be successful, there needs to be infrastructure. And another point that we bring up in the vision is like, it would be good to have, say, an interim step. So even though the vision talks about 2035, on the map, we also show 2025, and that's more in line where I think the ACF regulation goes. 2024 is already a start of things, and we focus on 2025 for this purpose. But it's good to have an initial infrastructure in place that is larger than what currently exists. For example, for hydrogen, there are 3 heavy-duty stations already operational in Southern California. They support trucks are currently operating in the ports already by Toyota and Kenworth. And they are, from what I understand, doing an excellent job on moving the freight as expected by the fleet operator. So I'll leave it with that because you're wanting to focus specifically on location planning and corridor planning. I just thought I'd add those points to what James already presented earlier during this conversation.
Hey, Nico, I've got a quick favor for you. Not everybody has access to the chat, not all of our audience. If you could possibly put that link in the chat, maybe even as a question so that others can see it. And that goes the same for others who want to share some of the public documents and websites. If we could do that through the chat, not the chat function, but the Q&A function,
yeah,
much appreciated.
So would I post it as a question?
Sure.
I don't see where I can post a question as a panelist. I can only answer a question, it looks like.
Oh, that's the same with me. Okay, how about you emailed the link to me, somebody posted as a question, I will put it as an answer.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Technology. Thank you. Aravind Kailas?
Yeah, thanks, Annalisa, and very good points by my co-panelists, and I concur. A few things that I wanted to put on the table just for consideration is the industry is on the cusp of transitioning to battery electric vehicles, especially when it comes to the medium duty, heavy duty sector. Light duty, we have at least 10 years of experience. We're well on our way, but for medium duty, heavy duty, this is happening now. So when we talk to our customers, our dealerships, they're kind of anxious in terms of what the roadmap will be for zero emission technology. And we have maintained that it's going to be a mix of battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, depending on the application. But in these early stages, I think it's very important to get clarity as to how California is making these investments and for what applications. For that, I think one of the comments that Eddie had raised earlier, talking to the fleets and figuring out the fleets that are taking on battery electric trucks today, how are they using it? What is their appetite for fuel cell electric vehicles? Are they going to have a mixed fleet, or is it going to be a very different set of fleet operations? I think that is the first thing. The second thing is, I know we're looking at ACF, but we already know other states are looking at California's ACT. Maybe they are starting to think about the ACF. So again, when we think about the infrastructure planning, let's start thinking whether are we trying to solve the California problem and enable adoption of fuel cell electric trucks across California, or is it going to be across the nation? So I'm almost visualizing identifying fleets that are right for this type of technology and really figuring out where they go. And then the infrastructure will be to support those fleets, because I don't think every fleet will want to take this. This is not a technology for every application, just like we know that battery electric technology is not going to be the solution for every application. So I think I just want to put those perspectives on the table. And the third one, and then I'll wrap it up, is we all are familiar with, I guess most of us are familiar with the West Coast Clean Transit Corridor Initiative, which looks at the I-5, Interstate 5. I think it was, I forget, Eddie who made that comment about, or James, maybe the I-5 corridor. I think that's important. That has the designated spots for battery electric trucks. And I think one thought process could be, well, we already know some trucks probably will, stations will be set up and some trucks are going to be using that. Could those locations be options, again, for some of those locations, a subset of those locations, could be options for fuel cell electric trucks. And I'm only saying this because once a site is developed, we might be able to piggyback and do something kind of like a 2-4, especially if it's dedicated for medium duty, heavy duty trucks. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see who we have next. James Dumont.
Hi, good morning. James Dumont, Momentum. I would like to focus on additional funding opportunities. I know it was briefly, I don't want to get too deep into cost and funding, that's a future workshop, but the IIJA also has a lot of funding for alternative fuels corridors, which means we need to coordinate closely with Caltrans as well when we're trying to go forward with this planning and siting analysis to identify where Caltrans can help co-fund utilizing federal funds, because CARB has a role to play, Caltrans has a role, and so will the CEC. We want to make sure that these co-investments are able to be adequately and intelligently cited and made to maximize California taxpayer dollars and avoid redundancy and strain in investments. Ideally, I agree with Arvind. We should be trying to piggyback on a lot of the research and planning activities that have been completed to date for the electrification side, the battery electric side, that is, and try to identify where our first corridor should be to really build up ecosystems or even small scale production microcosms so that we can start to scale up and reduce the cost of delivered hydrogen, as that is a large portion of that's really precluding the advancement of the technology. And then I'd like to also discuss focusing on maritime activities, since that is another aspect where hydrogen has a major role to play that battery electric doesn't have a strong opportunity. So we should be looking to start utilizing our inland waterways, the marine highways programs, and near coastal shipping to develop small scale supply chains that can eventually be scaled up to support ocean going vessels in the future. So we need to get the partnerships there as well to look at how to decarbonize one of the largest carbon sinks, carbon sources and sinks in the world, which is maritime transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. John Somerset.
Yeah, I got missed actually earlier in the introduction, so if I can start out quickly with that piece. So John Somerset, Director of Product Management for US GAIN, and we are renewable hydrogen production as well as alternative station development in general. Quick comment, I wanted to emphasize some of the thoughts from earlier on the I-5 corridor. Great place for us to start putting up new stations, and the way that I look at this is with the demand that we see in the lower parts and the southern parts of California, the trucks that are actually coming in there, being able to connect long routes up in Northern California, but additionally with the LCFS program that's coming up in Washington State, and the fact that transit agencies are already starting to establish refueling around that I-5 corridor, it's an excellent thing for us to concentrate on as we get into the heavy duty sector, being able to connect into another LCFS state.
Thanks. And Ashish Bhakta.
Hey, so coming from an infrastructure provider at Trillium, we hear a lot of these arguments, especially on the OEM side and the fleet side. We have these conversations daily, just trying to solve the chicken and the egg issue. One thing we are trying to do again on the daily is leverage our existing LUZ network, the LUZ truck stop network. It goes up and down California, goes across the whole nation. And the overarching issue is economics, right? There's a reason why in the word cloud we saw cost as the biggest word. Currently in California, we have a network of light duty hydrogen stations, and I would assume that's a lot of that is based on HRI credit, and it probably played a large role in that. So how soon can we see a heavy duty HRI credit, right? That can really piece both sides together. From the supply side seems ready, but the demand side needs a little bit of help in terms of infrastructure. And as an infrastructure provider, if a station is public, the intent of the credit, the HRI credit, should be satisfied. But I'm just here to see how soon we can see a heavy duty HRI credit.
Jacob, is that something that you're comfortable talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that the so currently, as you said, the HRI provision is limited to light duty vehicles, and any changes to that provision would be part of the next round of rulemaking. We had the LCFS program had a workshop last week where we discussed, potentially including medium and heavy duty stations as part of the HRI provision. The earliest that would be made into effect would be 2024, because the LCFS follows the scoping plan rulemaking, and so that's the quickest that can in terms of our implementation schedule. So it's definitely something that we've had a lot of stakeholder interactions with, and it's something. It seems like there are different complexities because of there might be more of a private fleet operator station or public stations, and so we'll have to see if there'll be nuances there in terms of how the credits will be generated, as well as the sizing of the stations relative to the capacity. That will also be something that will need to be discussed as part of the rulemaking, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about.
Thank you, Jacob. Next up, we have Harry Mamizuka.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Eddie's comments about the infrastructure and the impact of the of medium and heavy duty trucking on not only the fueling infrastructure, but it's also the support services infrastructure. One of the unique criteria or characteristics of the medium and heavy duty customer is that most trucks are specified for unique applications. So cement trucks or long haul trucks or drayage trucks, they're all different in terms of their application as well as specifications. And so therefore, there's no substitute mode of transportation of their goods or products. And so again, the trucking customer really relies on a support network to go along with the fueling in terms of infrastructure support so that they can move goods in an efficient manner throughout the state. And so some consideration should be made through this panel on including support services or support capabilities beyond just fueling as well. So just wanted to bring that point up.
Thank you. Okay, John Luis.
Yes, thank you. I think there's an important thing that we need to realize here, which is building hydrogen infrastructure is something that will take time, and we will be in a transition period for a long time, and that will also include the number of trucks that are effectively using hydrogen, which means that, for example, we're talking with truck manufacturers here who tell us that the average requirements for a filling station will be 4 tons, 5 tons per day hydrogen. But this is ultimately down the road, this is the kind of requirement that will be that they will have or that will be needed. That there will be this transition period where there are only a few trucks who come and actually refill on the stations. And I think at this point, there's not much we can do about this. What we can do certainly is to try to quicken and make this transition as short as possible. But I believe that we also have a very interesting opportunity in using not the public stations, but maybe we could call that the semi-public stations that will be created around captive fleet. For example, we have projects in Europe where we are talking to, and we are developing solutions for waste processing companies who plan to use that hydrogen for their own trucks, more specifically for garbage trucks. They will not use all the hydrogen, and that hydrogen will be available for refilling. And I don't see any reason why we would not be able to make this information about available filling stations, not necessarily the public full capacity ones, but all hydrogen sources that potentially would be available for trucks to refill. One panelist earlier was mentioning the potential problem with donor paths, for example, being closed in winter. Having having an information grid available about what stations, what filling points are available would really help, probably making the fleet operators feeling much safer and much more confident in using trucks, which is also another very important key, I think.
Thank you. Next up, we have Eric Guter.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that were made, and I know that CARB is working aggressively towards the rulemaking process, but certainly extending the HRI and LCFS credits that were associated with light duty infrastructure, which has been very successful, and the rollout of stations. I think that's very important to extend into heavy duty, and I realize that will be not until 2024. I would also encourage us to think not in terms of total stations, but in terms of how much hydrogen throughput is important, and that any incentives that we extend into heavy duty infrastructure development look at rewarding commercial scale installations, as well as the reliability and performance metrics associated with those stations, so that we ensure the best use of the incentives that were placed into the market. And then lastly, it suggests that we also make sure that we coordinate with the California Transportation Commission's planning efforts around SB 671 regarding ZEV infrastructure along these heavily trafficked freight corridors. I think this has the opportunity to move quickly, but we have to think of scale, and we have to think of scale not only in terms of infrastructure, but also how we coordinate that with sources of production to ensure the reliability for commercial scale adoption.
Thank you for bringing up the 671 effort. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that process is. We may have a lot of folks that aren't familiar with what that bill is going to result in.
Well, ensuring that we just have the ZEV infrastructure along these heavily trafficked corridors, which are generally in heavily impacted communities. Think of I-10 corridor, which is a very industrialized corridor. And so making sure that we have an eye towards investment in these disadvantaged areas and heavily impacted areas resulting from the significant amount of emissions associated with truck and other traffic.
Yeah, thank you. It's my understanding that they're in the process right now of defining what those corridors are through a public process and in cooperation with state agencies like CEC and CARB. So yeah, that's going to be I think a valuable process that may also feed into identification of priority corridors for federal funding as well. Thank you. Next up, Teresa Cook. And I wanted to mention that we're coming to the time point to switch topics. And so I'm focusing on folks who haven't spoken yet. I think I have 3 more, and then we'll switch over to the next topic.
Thanks, Annalisa. I'll be fast. Teresa Cook on behalf of the California Hydrogen Coalition. I wanted to build on a point that Eddie raised in the beginning of this conversation, which was, what about the fueling infrastructure outside of major corridors, or as Ballard pointed out, our ports area? And I just think sometimes there is an unnecessary bifurcation between stations, retail stations that are intended to be exclusively for light duty, when in fact they're not, and will be serving up to Class 6 vehicles. And so when we think about our last mile delivery trucks, et cetera, that is fueling infrastructure that will be heavily utilized by, ACS compliant entities. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good point. And Jay?
Yeah, can I be heard?
Yes.
Cool. I wanted to comment a little bit about some safety codes and standards activities that are going on that impact the ability to build stations. There are, the NFPA 2 set of codes, much more so than the ICC. But as far as ISO is concerned, in the international community, we are working really diligently on putting codes together to deploy and roll out the fueling stations. ISO is used in the United States. We always rely on local codes and whatnot. What happens is it flows down. So I invite you all folks to take a look at what ISO is doing. And with respect to the individual transportation vehicle, the GTR 13 is going through phase 2 right now, and we are looking very hard at what is necessary for trucks and things of this nature. The GTR amongst the contracting parties have all agreed to deploy the GTR language into their local codes and standards. So DOT will be looking at those kinds of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Brian Goldstein.
Thanks, Annalisa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So in the NGO community, we often discuss the risk of picking a winner, and that's often reiterated within the policy and regulatory communities as well. Yet with our state level investment choices, we're signaling the industry right now that hydrogen has about 3% of our ZEV support in California. So returning to the concept of what keeps me up is not at night, especially as a soldier in the hydrogen movement, I'm most concerned with inconsistent signaling to industry that supports, that California supports the clean hydrogen movement. You know, I'd like to echo Tim Sassine's comments about signaling support for hydrogen, especially across sectors, across mobility, renewable energy storage, and industrial decarbonization. In mobility, at the end of the day, we only have 2 tools in the ZEV toolbox, and we're simply not able to achieve our climate air quality goals with batteries alone. So I think this is especially relevant when you consider that 50% of people in California live in multifamily housing that often lacks access to infrastructure charging. So to bring that back to heavy duty, consider the phrase multifamily in terms of the 18,000 heavy duty trucks that we have at the port complex in Los Angeles. Simply picking, you know, one specific technology type at the port, it would almost be impossible to service 18,000 heavy duty trucks and keep them in operation consistently. So that's one of many reasons why consumers and heavy duty fleet managers need diverse technology options. Those options will allow them to rely on fast refueling, long ranges, and perhaps most importantly in the context of environmental justice, it's the ability to refuel in a familiar communal fashion that suits the underserved communities and the massive scale of commercial activity that helps us maintain the 5th largest economy in the world. So I think it's really time for us to step up as leaders in the hydrogen movement here in California and to kind of reconfirm our commitment as the state that really founded the market, at least for light duty vehicles worldwide, and to really take back that leadership position here. And I think heavy duty probably presents the best opportunity to do so across the mobility space, but we certainly shouldn't ignore the role of renewable energy storage and industrial decarbonization while we're doing that. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Brian. That was actually a really good segue into our next topic, which is scaling up hydrogen. So appreciate that, that transition. Let's see. Tyson, did you want to tee this one up?
Did we miss timelines for hydrogen station development?
You're right. I skipped down to the next.
And maybe if that might only take 20 minutes, then we'll be right back on track.
Yeah. Okay.
Or I mean, 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is sorry about that. Timelines for hydrogen station development. We'd like to talk about perspectives on what it takes to build a station. So in particular, if we've got some hydrogen station providers who have anything to share. And yeah, we have a couple of hands up. Let me start with Eric.
Maybe just for
yeah.
Just real quickly, I think in terms of this, because we know it takes a long time to build stations in California. I think that part is clear. We've been, kind of on the ground floor with a lot of you on this. And so really, I think what we're looking, the opportunities to improve that timeline. We've done a lot on the EV charging station streamlining front, and it's a little bit more straightforward in some ways, in terms of, because the law that dictates that takes away effectively takes away planning authority and just makes it building. And so on the hydrogen side, we're looking for opportunities to streamline, from a regulatory perspective, but then also, broad law changing or legislative type of stuff. And so, just with that lens on it, what we're really trying to figure out, how can we improve the system? Because we have to build a lot of stations quickly to scale up.
Thank you.
So, sorry. From our perspective, I think to foster hydrogen station development, the state should consider shifting prioritization of fuel cell of incentives to fuel cell electric vehicle purchase incentives. And we think those incentives will create the demand for private companies to invest in, develop, and deploy hydrogen fueling infrastructure and associated production and supply capabilities. And long-term certainty about their availability will allow us to plan for the right fleet mix for them. Certain cases, fuel cell will be the right solution. Others it'll be BEVs, and that's right because we need a collective mix to be successful in meeting the decarbonization goals. I think expanding fuel cell incentives and providing long-term certainty about the availability of those incentives over a time horizon will help fuel cell market launch and grow. I think with respect to the stations, we already touched on the LCFS and HRI credit extensions needed to help. I think that would be an appropriate action. And then I think it was touched on, but certainly permitting process and streamlining of that where possible, that can be coordinated through various state agencies like GO-Biz to help remove CEQA barriers, develop purpose-built hydrogen refueling stations or brownfield or greenfield locations to service light, medium, and heavy-duty fuel cell vehicles. We have the opportunity to have multimodal fueling in many locations, and we should want to do that. And then with an eye towards prioritizing these freight corridors and appropriate zoning. And I think that, and then I touched on already this performance-based metric and commercial scale incentive application of all of this. So I think, and that's all I want to cover. Thank you.
Hi, this is Leslie. I wanted to just chime in because I know there's a lot of OEMs in the audience and they already know this. And I know with hydrogen, it's really a chicken and egg thing. We do need the stations before the trucks. That said, I want to just encourage that parallel focus from the fuel providers and the station developers at the same time, the truck OEMs, and we know you're working on it, but those commercial incentives are key. I absolutely agree with you. On our HVIP side and the VW side, it's just a matter of getting those trucks to be able to be legally sold and operated in the state of California to be eligible for our incentive programs. I know you're on track, but please stay the course and please continue to communicate with each other and the stations and the OEMs, because these are those strong signals that need to be sent. Our incentive programs do fund fuel cell vehicles. They just have to meet their legal requirements to operate in the state of California.
Okay, and Eddie?
Thank you, Annalisa. I was just about to put this in the chat, so I'll just say it to everyone. This is a fact that not a lot of people don't know. When you're talking about retail fuel stations, not the truck stops, but I guess they're included in this as well. They don't make a profit until they dispense about 1 million gallons a month. And so that's why you see most of the retail stations today having mini markets. That's where a lot of their profit is. And so, and no private business is going to invest the $1 million plus to install infrastructure for fueling hydrogen if they don't have a customer base. So the need to continue to subsidize that infrastructure for the retail stations and the truck stops is huge. They're not going to invest that money and then only have 20 trucks a day come in for hydrogen fuel. So if we want to get there, and I've said this before, and I'll say it a different way, the transformation to zero emission technology would probably naturally occur by the end of this century without regulation, without subsidies. But what CARB is doing is compressing that time frame to about 20 years. And in so doing, the costs are increasing 3x or 4x. So the need for grants and subsidies for the equipment, the infrastructure, and the cost of the fuel itself has to continue past the adoption of the regulations, or there's going to be a lot of hiccups here. And so in terms of, and the other issue, I didn't really know how to address this. It was more like just thinking out loud, but I'm concerned, maybe a little concerned about the role of NIMBYism. We do need zero emission vehicles and trucks in the EJ communities, which kind of aligns with the trade corridors, but elsewhere as well. But I'm a little concerned about looking towards a future where affluent communities say no to hydrogen. And so I don't know how that really shakes out or how that affects us. But my main point there is on the subsidies and the costs and timing of the fuel stations. Remember that the retail fuel stations don't make a lot of money off of fuel. They have to be really, really busy and sell about 1 million gallons or more to make money off the fuel dispensing. So we do need to support them in subsidies.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have a job to do to educate all communities about the role of hydrogen stations, hydrogen fueling, around safety and emissions and traffic. All of those things, because I think it's change, and change can be hard sometimes. So I think there is a need to address that with outreach and education. Next up is Pete Montero.
Thank you. I won't touch on the chicken equation, which Leslie brought up. That's obvious to everyone. But one of the things I would like to point out is that as we're talking about commercial vehicles that will be hitting the market, we expect, at Hyundai, we expect that the market will see, not necessarily from us, the first certified sellable fuel cell electric trucks before the middle of the decade. The latter part of the decade, it's going to be an expanding market in terms of the availability of trucks. And the biggest issue for us is that the infrastructure isn't in place. And we talk about the total number of hydrogen fueling stations right now as being in the 50s, or building towards that 100 bogey. But the reality is that of those, only a handful, literally, you can count on one hand the number of stations that are appropriate for the kind of size of truck as well as fuel capacity that we're talking about with our trucks. So that's something to keep in mind, is that the infrastructure can't just be a one-size-fits-all kind of infrastructure. And it involves, like I said, not just the physical space of the location, but also the fueling apparatus itself. So that's going to be really important to keep in mind. And I'm not sure how much that plays into regulatory and policy planning so much as just the recognition that there are specific applications that need to be at least acknowledged, if not supported outright. The other thing I'll say, and this is not an advertisement for us, but for Hyundai, but the reality is that the movement towards hydrogen fuel cells for commercial vehicles is existing outside of the US market. And in some respects, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's more than just environmental strategy and environmental policy, which is all important. We recognize that. We want a world that's much cleaner, much more healthy for all of us and our kids. But the reality is it's also part of an industrial and an economic strategy and policy. And I can give you an example. We've already announced this, but by 2028, all of our commercial vehicles globally will be available with a hydrogen fuel cell electric drivetrain available. And none of that works without an infrastructure in place. So we strongly encourage supportive development of the infrastructure as much as possible in order to make sure that the egg gives birth to that chicken. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Aiden with CTE.
Hi, good morning. You're speaking about the topic of permitting. I think one of the low-hanging fruits would be any kind of additional guidance that state-level agencies can provide to the local HJs when it comes to CEQA. One of the things that I run into often is when meeting with local jurisdictions and discussing the initial planning approach on the project, they're often, lack of a better term, anxious about how to tackle the issue of CEQA. And I'm talking about existing facilities, existing gas stations. As you know, the majority of new hydrogen light duty stations are built on existing gas stations. So any kind of guidance that could flow down from the state to these jurisdictions would be very helpful. There are 2 cases where we did have to do initial studies that I have direct experience with. And the specific reason was because of past existing contamination on the site. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on that. And maybe that could help streamline some of the permitting in the future.
Can I bring up just real quick on that, Aidan, in terms of the brownfields type of thing? The US EPA has a pretty exciting program happening now with expansion in brownfield and like kind of clearing sites for from liability. I can pull that link up, but there's, I know East Bay Community Energy is starting to leverage it for fast charging stations in the East Bay region, and so I think there's a big opportunity in hydrogen as well. And
oh, that's great.
To it.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, the next hand raised is Tim Sassin.
Yeah, regarding scaling and the pace of getting these fueling stations and infrastructure in place, one area to attack definitely is local AHJs, getting consistency in permitting across the state and a common understanding of hydrogen, the safety concerns and requirements would help a lot. We've seen on the transit side, some agencies turning away from hydrogen because of concerns that are really quite outdated about the nature of the safety of the fuel. So getting that education out there is going to be important. We also strongly support the expansion of the fueling station capacity credits in the LCFS program to heavy duty sized stations. Getting these stations out as soon as possible is going to be critical. Again, it's a matter of courage and commitment. California is committed to zero emission vehicles by the middle of this century, and it should be committed to energy sources from both electricity and from hydrogen. And getting those capacity credits helps to get those stations up and going along those major corridors in time to meet our very aggressive ACT and ACF goals. And the final thing I would say to really accelerate this is to stay in lockstep with the rest of the states in the nation. California is no longer an island in zero emission vehicles. The rest of the US is going to step up and step up fast. And when we talk about trucks, we're talking about Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, all these neighboring states, and even across the country. We're a co-founding member of the United States Hydrogen Alliance, and our intention is to cross-pollinate good policy from different states. And a lot of people have been following California. California needs to be open to following other states as they step up as well. So I encourage keeping that dialogue open on a state-to-state level as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Mike Reddick.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would definitely echo those sentiments that that Tim had just said on the permitting and the education program. So we've found out firsthand how important that is at Chevron as we're developing, our first heavy duty, medium duty, light duty station. Thankfully, we have land available in the Richmond market already as we continue to build out our supply capabilities as well. But a lot of the slowdown has been the permitting and entitlements with these projects. We'd love to get them up and running in 2022, but it looks like some of the delays will be until 2023, given some of the equipment timelines that we're facing as well too. Now, I know CARB has no control over that type of operation, but it is delaying a lot of the station development going forward. And we certainly look forward to the opportunity to continue to participate in these public-private partnerships with the various programs that exist in the market today, because we definitely believe the future is lower carbon and hydrogen is a major portion of that. And we'll continue our investment programs longer term in enabling the hydrogen market. But just looking at even a greenfield site that we're developing now is a 4-year timeline before the heavy duty segment will see that station as operational. So we'd love to be involved in any type of roadshow education program that helps these various local municipalities and agencies understand hydrogen and get them up to speed to how we expedite the permit and entitlement process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've made a note of that willingness to volunteer. We may well take you up on that. That's very constructive. Thank you. Next up is Nico Bauckham.
Thank you, Annalisa. To add a few notes to your question about timelines for hydrogen station development, obviously the time for investment is now. You just heard the timeline mentioned by Chevron. The longer the wait is, the longer it takes for an infrastructure to be in place and trucks effectively to be rolled out. That's the first point. But with regards to the ownership, for example, of sites, if transit could be an example here, but then on the other hand, it's not, because it's a behind the fence setup. Currently, there are 3 transit agencies that are implementing their heavy duty fueling infrastructure, and several of the implementers on the panel here as well. That takes at least 1.5 years from the point where they have contracts signed. So there's some time that goes ahead of that, and then it's behind the fence fueling, and that's a different permitting situation, obviously, than a public commercial fueling setup. So even though permitting is an issue in some cases, it varies from city to city. Yes, there is NIMBYism. Yes, there are city preferences that affect it, but reality that also happens for gasoline stations or other stations. When it's at a zoned area. However, with regards to, there's maybe a difference between publicly funded stations as well as and privately funded stations. It appears that for privately funded stations, the process may go a little quicker because there is less of a lead time with regards to contracting. So that's something to consider how that can be encouraged. And I've already heard some suggestions about how that can be encouraged. So I don't need to repeat that here. I think you're aware of that, but that's something to consider. Also, an aspect here to mention as well is utility timelines. They're often much longer than many other industries with regard to implementation. There's a variety of reasons. It differs a little bit from utility to utility and specific location to specific location because of grid capacity or grid availability. There is, and then on top of that comes, like, if a utility has an emergency, which we are very familiar with in California in the last several years, things may change significantly for the site. You may have all your contracts in place, you're in full swing, and then the utility tells you, sorry, but you'll have to wait till we're done with our emergency because we need all our crews to work on that to make sure our grid is actually working. Also, a last point is, even though I mentioned transit as somewhat of an indication, it is obviously a different setup. So it could be an indication of how things go, but because they have property ownership and it's behind the fence is a little different situation. But capacity-wise, technology-wise, I think it's good to look at them as well on how adoption goes and how the fleets could work with that. So I'll leave it with that because I have several experts speaking after me. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. We have 3 more hands raised on this topic, and then we're going to move to the next topic on the agenda. So next up is Aravind.
Hey, thanks again, Annalisa, and thanks for the vote of confidence. I like when I heard experts. We're all experts here trying to share our knowledge. But when we think about the timelines for permitting, the one thing that I wanted to throw out there is let's also think about getting a fully functioning site. It's not just enough to power it on and have it work once or twice, but let's just make sure that the services, the supply, the troubleshooting, and all the other things that are needed to keep this live 24/7 is there. The other thing is, again, when we're looking at truck stops, having the ability to reserve, know if the station is working. There's several aspects, right? There's got to be fuel, the nozzle's got to be working, and then there's this thing called refresh, as most of you know. We want to make sure that it's going to be available when the driver pulls up. So there's quite a bit of sophistication that will be needed to make this usable. And I think we have to have all those pieces, accounted for when we declare a site to be fully functional. So I just want to put it out there. All this is coming because I drive a Toyota Mirai, and I have firsthand experience with going to a fuel cell station and waiting for an hour and then getting to the pump and it's not working. And then I have to come up with some troubleshooting techniques if the nozzle's frozen or whatever else. This will not work for the trucking industry. I can tell you right off the bat. So when a site is declared fully functional, in addition to the PR and everything, all the good stuff, we better make sure that it is available and has 24/7 support. So I think that has to be baked into declaring a site fully ready. So I just really wanted to underscore that point. Thank you.
Thanks. And Jordan.
Hey, thank you. So a couple, I'm not going to belabor the permitting point. I mean, that's quite obvious that it is, continues to be an issue. I will say from the timeline that we took to permit 3 stations in California to what I think Gia pointed out as the current timeline is an improvement. So it is getting somewhat better. One thing that I think we need to consider is when we're talking about this market, specifically with heavy duty and the fueling infrastructure that's required for it, it is vastly more complex than what we're seeing for light duty fuel. The largest stations out there right now are about 1,200 kilograms a day. If you look at an average truck stop throughput, I mean, we could easily surpass 4,000 kilograms a day. So that's something not to necessarily be afraid of, but I just think I had a baseball coach, and this is going to sound really corny, but he used to say, you don't set your sails up when the wind is there, you set them up before the wind comes so that you're ready for, when the wind's there. And I'm not a sailor, so that means nothing to me, but it might mean something to you. But I do think now is the time to act and, get ready for this wave of, the required and desperately needed heavy duty stations. From an industry standpoint, we are making quite a bit of progress. From a technology standpoint, gas compression, we're already there. We can do it now at the capacities needed. Liquid supply, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years will be there from a volume standpoint and redundancy. That's the other thing I think we need to take a page out of the transit book is, these fleet operators have to have resilient supply and high reliability in the fueling network. I mean, that's a critical thing. Their business is predicated on them moving freight. So designing, corridors where you have resiliency built in and you're not, narrow-minded about, a route that a truck can take or what the specific range is going to be. And then kind of planning your streamlined permitting around that, I think is going to be a game changer, for the state. And something that as Tim said, I think, other states are starting to move in the same direction. And I think it'll set a precedent, if we're able to really streamline this process. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you. And sorry for having to join a little late. I wanted to echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues around permitting. And yes, we have in the past had done quite a bit of outreach with the national labs and NFPA, and it sounds like it's time to pick that up again. So I just wanted to say, as the Fuel Cell Partnership, we certainly have had experience doing that and would love to do that again with our members and with all of you. And in terms of streamlining, it's a phrase that's always kind of made me cringe in the past, but it's probably the best word. I've had some recent conversations and some ideas, and I think, I'd like to explore further some potential solutions for hydrogen, because to some of the comments made with the various jurisdictions and the various processes that happen in those, HJs are all individual people, right? But there could be some kind of big ticket items that maybe we could work to sort of smooth over across the board. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a little bit of thought provoking maybe. But yeah, I'd love to work with you all and doing some outreach again. So thank you.
Definitely made a note of that. Love the volunteers. Okay, Now we can turn over, this time for real, to scaling up hydrogen. Sorry for getting out of order before this item. And let's see. So Tyson, do you want to tee this one up?
Sure. So I think we all kind of know where we need to go. And I think you can envision a future where, there's plenty of supply, the distribution's strong, the cost, or, people are competing to bring lower cost molecules to sites. And then we have where we are today where, supply is strained. We have some challenges getting the molecules to the sites. And so of course there's that bridging the gap in between, and there's, new opportunity with federal funding and also all the state funding coming in as far as building out the stations. And so, there's a lot really to think about in this way. And I think we'll probably only be able to scratch the surface with this group, but what can we be doing to really get to scale this market, to bring the cost down? And, just kind of looking back at the envelope, some of the new supply coming online, those are like 30-ton projects. I was just doing back of the envelope math. I think if we wanted to do all the Class 8 market in California, I think we need about 300 more of those, so like, that's a lot, right? And like identifying the space and the land and the energy supply for it. I mean, it's not undoable, but I think that so really wanted to get some wisdom about how we should be thinking about it, approaching it, getting from where we are today to where we need to go. So maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, and we've got some hands going up. Eddie, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks, Annalisa. So, so with regard to scaling, we look at it a little differently, or we look at it for our own needs. So many of you may have seen the press release came out earlier this week. We're partnering with Chevron and Progress Rail to develop and pilot a hydrogen fuel cell locomotive. And if you look at today's line haul locomotives, there's 5,000 gallons of diesel in the tank, and that's the equivalent of about 200 megawatts of energy. If we are able to prove the concept of hydrogen fuel cell locomotives, BNSF alone will need somewhere north of 10,000 megawatts of energy per day. So if we're talking about hydrogen, I think one of the questions that CARB needs to answer is, what is the energy equivalent for all these trucks and all these other uses, right? What is the total volume that we're going to need to convert? And I said this before, and many others have said this as well. Even in our own fleet of trucks, our depot-bound trucks were already converting to battery electric because they have the opportunity to charge on opportunity charge in the facility. Our service vehicles, however, are really not depot-bound. They go out on the right-of-way, they perform work 12 to 16 hours. They need energy all day, so we're thinking they're probably going to need hydrogen fuel cells. But as you look at the supply and scaling up, we need to get an answer to the question: is how much hydrogen do we need, and where does it need to be sited, which we talked about earlier, and then the cost. I had mentioned previously that the Office of the State Fire Marshal and the Fire Code needs to be brought into the conversation. You can permit hydrogen, we know that, but what's the cost of permitting it? When you have a canopy, a roof over your fueling dispensers, I believe that the fire marshal will likely, in many jurisdictions, will require automatic fire suppression systems, which increases your costs. And then the consideration of, it's analogous to remodeling the only bathroom in a house that's occupied. If you have a fuel station that's currently dispensing petroleum, not only is the footprint something to consider, but how do you convert or add hydrogen fueling when you've got a limited footprint, and how do you convert that over? And then the cost again is, I'll just emphasize again, the need to support the conversion, whether it's battery electric or hydrogen, for the fueling station and the fueling supply, because the equivalent cost today, I think, is the number I just heard was roughly $10 a gallon equivalent to diesel. So if we're buying diesel at $3 to $4 a gallon, and we buy a lot of diesel just in California, we're somewhere between 100 million and 200 million gallons a year just in California. So if we're going 2.5 times that cost, it's simply not going to work for us. And I know for a lot of companies that cost has to come down, way down, to be competitive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Eric.
Yeah, thank you. So when it comes to hydrogen and clean and low carbon hydrogen, shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There are environmental and greenhouse gas benefits to expanding infrastructure, even while gray hydrogen is prevalent. Deployment of low carbon hydrogen will provide even more benefits as projects come online while zero carbon projects are still being developed. And state policy should encourage and incentivize infrastructure in both low and zero carbon hydrogen production. Imports of hydrogen, decarbonization of all industry sectors, including mobility, will require hydrogen, more hydrogen than can initially and probably ultimately be produced in California. Therefore, we think state policy should be crafted to encourage importation of clean hydrogen in all forms from outside the state. Hydrogen hub ecosystems, the state should move toward development of low carbon green hydrogen hub concept, which by design matches adequate hydrogen supply with intended uses, including transportation, power, other hard to abate sectors. I think the discussion around cost is important, and certainly the only way we can drive costs down is by scale and adoption. I think we also can't lose sight of the fact that we subsidize oil and gas to the tune of about $1 trillion globally on an annual basis, and there is no cost of carbon's impact on society. So I think if we redirect those costs and recognize those cost savings from our efforts here, I think these costs should come in line with where the industry expects them to be.
Thank you. Next up, I have David with CSULA.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to address this forum. I have a kind of 4 points I would like to make. One is workforce, and at all levels, technician level and advanced engineering degrees. So that's one of the kind of directions we're working at Cal State LA. And by speaking with employers in recent communications, there is a real shortage in engineers. So I would like to encourage CEC to continue working in that area in workforce development. Now, second point, electrical vehicles and batteries are limited by the countries where lithium can be mined, where hydrogen presents an opportunity to develop economies around the world. I mean, all kinds of equipment, all kinds of energy generation. So a very universal economic development tool, and I would like us to be more proactive in that in California. Next concern in the wide deployment of hydrogen technologies is availability of equipment. So something that California Energy Commission can play a bigger role in attracting more manufacturing of equipment for hydrogen infrastructure to the state. Because hydrogen projects are taking shape around the world, and costs are going up. And so when awards are made 1 year and you build it 30 months later, the cost of your, let's say, hydrogen tanks or compressors are 50% up. So how can you build that into economic model, or are there, add up grants once to follow up on, on the infrastructure build out? I'm also glad that someone mentioned where energy will be coming from and connecting hydrogen to renewable energy production, because majority of hydrogen right now comes from fuel reforming. And I really support fuel reforming as a very strong intermediate step to transitioning to hydrogen economy, but we need to build out forward with the electrolysis and renewable hydrogen generation. So that's next concern, and I think Philip was very correct talking about where energy is coming from and type of energy. And my fourth point and the last one altogether points us to this concept, and Peter mentioned that, of hubs. And I really would like our discussion, or the next discussion, to be about hydrogen hubs and so that the state, California Air Resources Board, California Energy Commission, they all contribute to creating a strong hub application for federal funding. Because once we get a hub to California, and there are many indicators we are well situated at, combining BNSF project, combining LADWP project, and big project, combining them and establishing the corridor, maybe in collaboration with the state of Washington. Create this collaboration, create this hub culture, and build it up. And I think we can benefit from that tremendously if we want the hydrogen industry to grow in California. So thank you. Those are the points.
Thank you. Next we have Brenner.
Yeah, thank you. So, Plug Power announced earlier this year, we're doing a 30-ton per day metric tons liquid hydrogen in Fresno County in California. So we are very committed to increasing the fuel supply. I think we also recognize, though, 30 tons a day sounds a lot by today's standards, and a new liquefaction plant of that size is certainly in the ballpark for today's standards, but it's not a lot of Class 8 trucks, and that the real need for the hydrogen is multiples of that. So I think that the way we think about growing the fuel supply is by orders of magnitude. So by 500 tons by 2025, that's only 10,000 trucks, but 10x that, just 3 or 4 years after that. And that's the way you have to think about scaling the supply side of this business. And that's green hydrogen. We only do green hydrogen. The key with that is it is very difficult to do that inside California. So a 30-ton per day plant, 300 megawatts of solar, 2,500 acres of land is a tough project to pull off in California, and we're not going to be able to do too many of those projects. So I think we have to recognize that growth in green hydrogen production will often predominantly be outside of the state of California. So we have to make sure that we implement policies that allow us to make green hydrogen in the best places we can, places with the lowest land costs, with the lowest renewable energy costs, so that we can basically deliver a product at cost parity to fossil fuels. And we certainly see that target in sight. Frankly, for Plug Power, green hydrogen is a significant cost reduction buying liquefied gray hydrogen. So we look forward to transitioning as fast as we can.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks. I would agree with Brenner. We need to be ready for a lot of renewable hydrogen to be coming from outside of the state. There are people queuing up to get hydrogen production plants in the surrounding areas where the economics might work out better. But I think for scaling up, we also need a broader perspective than just transportation. David Bleckman pointed out that most hydrogen today comes from fossil fuels, and that's true. And that's great news, because that hydrogen right now could be displaced and have an instant carbon win. If you took all of the hydrogen, all the diesel fuel that's used in California, you replace the hydrogen that's used for desulfurization with green hydrogen, that would displace the equivalent of about 8,000 Class 8 diesel trucks. That hydrogen then can transition over as we get more and more zero-emission trucks and less diesel trucks to fuel about 4,000 trucks. So having comprehensive strategies that look at industrial uses like diesel desulfurization, like ammonia production, like building usage, like injection into the pipeline to decarbonize our natural gas stream, all needs to be looked at in concert with this transformation of transportation into zero emissions, because all of it decreases the cost of that zero emission fuel that benefits all of transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, thanks very much. So we at Chevron believe that scale is very important to the overall hydrogen program. But at the same time, we think contingency plans on supply is just as important as well, too. So we may need to consider off-site or decentralized hydrogen production as well, and understanding that and what that entails as far as permitting and production is concerned. The great news really for the Richmond hydrogen project that we have now, we've got contingency supply around the hydrogen plant. with our investment in Raven SR, which is a waste to hydrogen project that is soon to be operational in late 2022. And we've got another 10.5 megawatt electrolyzer project that will also be adjacent to the Richmond refinery. So that contingency supply is as important as our centralized production of supply, and getting that type of situation for the market to have contingency plans when one goes down will be vitally important to our fueling infrastructure in Northern California, as well as looking at permitting and entitlements for on-site hydrogen production, small scale, utilizing renewable natural gas as a feedstock, or either smaller scale electrolyzer. We're proponents of both and think that that has application within the market. And we're certainly looking at that outside of our centralized production. So permitting of that, entitlements to that will be ultimately important to be able to expedite those type of projects to enable Central California and Southern California in locations outside of centralized hydrogen production. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, Jose?
Yes, good morning again, and thanks for the opportunity. Yes, following on what Mike was saying, is very coincident with what I was going to say. I mean, we believe that talking about the availability of hydrogen and resiliency, as well as bringing the costs of hydrogen down, it's important to leave space for some on-site production. Transportation of hydrogen is expensive and a little bit complicated, not matter whether it's gas or liquid, and it'll be always an important part of the cost of hydrogen. So there must be some space for on-site production, and the alternatives for that obviously are reforming and electrolysis. So that leads us to what we think is important for everyone to recognize, that one part of what we should try to do is concentrate efforts on providing additional stock of renewable natural gas. But also we're seeing in Europe, for example, that utilities, electrical utilities, are already being capable of providing long-term PPAs for electricity under 60 euros per megawatt hour, sometimes even 30 euros per megawatt hour, which would mean that it could be very feasible to produce from electrolysis on site at prices, hydrogen at a cost of $3 or less per kilogram. So that's what we think, that we believe part of the effort that we have to do is try to again find alternatives for renewable natural gas, and also find ways of making the grid available at lower prices for hydrogen production 24 hours a day, so that we can on site produce by electrolysis. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Next we have Jordan.
Hey, thank you. So a couple of themes are kind of emerging that I think we can all, just glom onto. So I'm not going to belabor any of those points. One big thing is just creating the environment for investment in the state of California, I think is something that's critical. You heard it from, Brenner and others, where it's difficult at times to justify the economics that is required to put in a massive, electrolyzer project to solar. So, creating an environment where, there's incentivization for bringing in production, but then also, looking at the ecosystem, which is where I think California stands in a different and almost differentiated position than anywhere else in the country, because you've got the ecosystem for investment. You've got, an emerging market. You've got regulation that's driving those markets. You've got synergies within those markets. And I'm not going to use any more buzzwords because that makes me want to throw up. But, I do think it's important to point out that, when we look at the federal infrastructure, look at the entire West Coast as a hub. You've got massive amounts of hydroelectric production in the north. With liquid hydrogen and even, some pipeline applications, you can transport that a heck of a long way. So opening, the boundaries of import of, hydrogen and some of the incentives that come with, green hydrogen I will just mirror, some of the sentiments about, renewable hydrogen from SMR technology is a bridge over the gap. Don't shoot yourself in the foot and, demand green hydrogen, which is ultimately the goal, and look past the hydrogen that's already being produced in massive amounts, globally. And those processes are getting, more efficient, cleaner. There's new technologies coming out that are going to really help those, the efficiency around, SMR and liquefaction. So, I do think it's prime, time for California to step up and really pave the way, especially with some of this infrastructure funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Patricio. We can't hear you. I see that you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you. I think we'll come back to you. We'll see if we can figure out what's going on. Apparently being joined over audio by phone doesn't seem to be working today. That's the advice I'm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I had called in, so that would be the problem. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. So, I heard this come up a little bit, and I kind of wanted to just, backtrack and maybe level set a little here. It's not about the perfect being the enemy of the good, but preventing us from perpetuating our reliance on polluting fuels longer than is necessary. So this means understanding that the policies and investments that the state makes today to try to move quickly will ultimately potentially result in stranded assets that impedes our overall transition to long-term 100% zero emissions, which is where we're trying to go. So it's insufficient to simply say, say scale hydrogen. Specifically, we need to be focusing on scaling green hydrogen. And this means defining and standardizing what it actually means to be green hydrogen, and then adopting guardrails to ensure that we're only supporting green hydrogen production for transportation. We also can't just, and others have mentioned this, we can't just look at transportation in a vacuum. There are other harder to abate sectors that could benefit from green hydrogen. And there's a very real need to manage competing demand for what is, at least in the near and medium term, a limited supply of this green hydrogen. So that means, it is vital that the state develop a cross-sectoral prioritization schedule to guide policies so that these competing demands are managed and targeted strategically. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Jean-Louis.
We talk about a lot about green hydrogen, and I'm a real big fan of green hydrogen. Actually, it's very important, as well. Lots of panelists say here. Today, most of our hydrogen is fossil. We want to move away from that, and being able to produce more and more green hydrogen to replace this fossil hydrogen is definitely something that is totally necessary. However, and we also mentioned that there is a limit in being able to produce this green hydrogen. That limit being the fact that, well, we need renewable electricity for our conventional power grid needs. And so, again, I'm not saying that we should stop producing green hydrogen. We do need to keep producing this green hydrogen. But I also wish we would have very fine companies like Raven SR or Sierra Energy being present here today at this panel, because we have an absolutely, not limitless, not unlimited, but we have a massive resource here in California, which is our waste. Today, California sends about 40 million tons of waste to landfills every year. California is also trying not to send this waste to landfills, actually. This is why we have the landfill diversion mandate. But, and I don't want to specifically focus on waste to age, but really this is a sector in itself. 40 million tons of waste going to landfill means at the very least, and probably more than that, but at the very least 30 million among these 40, 30 million of chemically organic waste, meaning that these are a source of hydrogen. And typically, if we make a quick calculation, we're talking about 1 million, hold on a second, 1,800,000 tons of hydrogen per year. And this 1.8 million tons, it's enough to fill or to supply 1,200 hydrogen filling stations, or to supply 60 million truck fuel tanks. I'm not saying that we will do all of this, obviously not, but we certainly have enough here to supply enough hydrogen to a company to go together along with this transition to a very, very serious level. This is not just a few stations here and there. It potentially is a network, and it's also a network that is based on the production of hydrogen from a feedstock that is local. So we're also not only talking bringing renewable electricity from outside the state, but using local resources to produce a local fuel that will be used locally. So this is circular economy. And finally, and I will stop here because we have plenty of other topics to talk about. Finally, this, not as opposed, but unlike a green hydrogen, which I prefer calling electrolytic hydrogen, waste to hydrogen solutions offer an opportunity to effectively be carbon negative. And after what we have all said and what we know about the transportation industry, and this also includes trains, planes, as well as cargo ships, transportation industry being a massive source of CO2, offering the potential to be a massive source of CO2 removal would be, maybe I'm dreaming a little bit here, but it would be very, very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have 2 more speakers on this topic, and I want to raise the question to both of them and any others who would like to chime in on this. If you can address in your comments what you foresee the expected cost to the consumer of produced and dispensed hydrogen at stations, and any assumptions that you're making in that forecast. Brenner?
Sure, thank you. I would say we've stated publicly that we believe we can deliver green hydrogen at cost parity to fossil fuels, cost parity to diesel, cost parity to gasoline. I further believe, coming from the renewable energy industry, that green hydrogen will bypass fossil fuels and will be the lowest cost form of transportation fuel available. There's very little doubt in my mind that we'll get there. It'll be the realization that the electricity industry got when coal was king and we thought that was the cheapest form of energy is going to happen to the fossil fuel industry and transportation. We will blow through fossil parity and get to far better. $1 per kilo is absolutely possible, probably by the end of this decade, for very large green hydrogen plants in the US. I would say that to echo Patricio's comments on stranded assets for fossil-derived hydrogen or mainly blue hydrogen, in general, fossil-derived hydrogen is not actually common. Plug Power is the largest purchaser of merchant gray liquid hydrogen in the world. We buy more than anyone else, and it is as scarce as hen's teeth quite often. And I'll say, as a Hyundai Nexo driver, love the car, hate the fuel availability in the South Bay in California. It is hard to get gray hydrogen, and it is expensive to get gray hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is not, to the extent that we're starting at a gate here to develop new hydrogen capacity. Blue, gray, and green hydrogen are really all starting from the same gate. And I think if you're contemplating building a very large blue hydrogen production capacity, you are contemplating something that is very likely to become a stranded asset, because you're believing there's going to be a big gap before green hydrogen shows up. There isn't. Green hydrogen will show up faster than you expect and in more quantity than you expect, and will be cheaper than you expect. I think when we come to set policy, need to be rigorous on CI scores. I think there are many sources of hydrogen, but we have to be absolutely honest and upfront about the true CI scores of any hydrogen that we put into the supply chain. And I think when we do that, we should be selecting for the absolute lowest CI scores that we can achieve, because we're building 30, 40, 50-year assets to produce this hydrogen. And so what we instantiate now, we're going to live with for a long time. I'd also like to say renewable energy is not scarce. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy to develop and build. Now, it can be hard to do in places like California, but there are many other places where it's far less hard to do. And so building out renewable energy orders of magnitude more than we have already will happen. All it needs is a demand signal to happen. You can build solar plants as fast as you can sell power purchase agreements. And so the more power that's needed, the more renewable energy will get built. So I really do have a very optimistic view, and Plug in general has a very optimistic view of the cost reduction of hydrogen. And we see a path to it being the cheapest possible transportation fuel and being close to completely green.
Hey, Brenner, I wanted to thank you so much for your response, but I also want to just follow up in case there are folks in the audience who are listening in and not sure what Brenner was talking about when he said CI scores. That's basically the carbon intensity associated with the fuel that's being produced, say by Plug and others, compared to the carbon intensity diesel. This is a metric that everybody in the alternative fuel industry understands very well, because a really low high CI score means you're able to earn greater amount of low carbon fuel standard credits through the LCFS market for that fuel dispensed. And what that means is it offsets that. It will definitely help at the very end of it. It lowers the actual price of hydrogen itself, and it enables the hydrogen producers and others to pass those savings on to the customer. And that's really a really important piece of it. So because those LCFS credits have a monetary value. So just thought I would set the stage of where Brenner's coming from. Thanks.
I also wanted to chime in and recognize that with almost 200 people on our meeting today, I'm not sure that everybody has a working definition of gray, blue, and green hydrogen. If somebody wants to pipe in with a quick explanation of that. Some feedback I got after our last session was that especially those who are on the panel are steeped in this stuff, and sometimes the terminology and acronyms that we use aren't readily accessible to everybody.
I think, as I brought up the spectrum colors, I'll just speak to it briefly. First of all, we have to recognize today they're sort of marketing terms and like organic food. And so we have to be careful how we use them. They don't have good definitions. And I think most of us would agree that we want very rigorous definitions. And most of us would agree that the carbon intensity score, how many kilograms of CO2 that we pump into the atmosphere to make this fuel, is really the key thing. And we should be sophisticated enough to look at the CI scores of the full pathways of any fuel, and not be sort of fooled by marketing terms. So in very broad sense, and not trying to offend anyone, green hydrogen is generally considered to be low or zero CI hydrogen that's made by the electrolysis of water using renewable energy. Now, the mix of that, the carbon intensity of energy is very important. Just because it's made with electricity doesn't mean its CI score is necessarily low. So, but that's a general definition. Gray hydrogen is the hydrogen that's made today. It's made mainly by the reforming of natural gas, and it's the vast majority of how our hydrogen is made today. and it's most of what's available for transportation. Blue hydrogen sits in the middle. It is gray hydrogen where you have captured all or most of the CO2 and presumably permanently sequestered it. And I just want to say there is a reforming of renewable natural gas, so biogas or landfill gas, which is very low CI or negative CI in some senses because you're not releasing methane. And that should certainly be considered green, even though it's reforming and it's not electricity. So I think that's sort of the landscape, but I do think the actual full CI score of the pathway is where we should focus.
Thank you for that. Okay, and next up is Tom.
Thanks, Annalisa. Good analysis there, Brenner, of the colors. If anybody has any other questions, I think you can direct them to Brenner. I like to talk more about the carbon intensity and renewable content of the molecules because, like Brenner said, the colors are definitely, marketing terms. I'll add and echo support for multiple renewable low or negative CI pathways for hydrogen. Waste to hydrogen, we've talked about quite a bit. Jay talked about that, and I think that's a really promising opportunity for hydrogen supply that is carbon negative and renewable in California, where our electrical grid is stressed already. It is true that there's plenty of electricity from renewables in other states, but not right here. Two talking points that I talk about a lot at tours and conferences are the PSPS shutoffs, the public safety power shutoffs that the governor has got going on in the summertime, so that we are not risking as much fire, and that is going to be difficult for that's going to be difficult for BEV drivers and battery electric truck drivers. That's kind of a thing that supports adding hydrogen as another energy vector to the power mix. Second talking point I talk about is that we unplugged the ship-to-shore powers for the big ships that go to the ports of LA and Long Beach. So, that's grid electricity that we saved. And the expense was that we're running diesel generators to power ships that are adjacent to land in LA. So that happens in the summertime. So all of those things tell me that, we are all working on the right stuff with heavy duty hydrogen in California. Annalisa asked about pricing. We've stated publicly that we aim for diesel gallon equivalency at full utilization by around the midpoint of the decade. There's a price for retail fuel that's very public. And then for fleet sales, we have bulk sales agreements, just like you would have with diesel and gasoline, and we'll negotiate those on a case-by-case basis. So if you talk to fleets, or if you are a fleet and they say, the hydrogen that Tom is peddling is too expensive and it's the same price as for the light duty cars, well, maybe we can negotiate these things on a case-by-case deal for Class 8 fleets. Got a couple questions to in the DM of this meeting about our existing stations. So we've got 3 existing stations operating in Southern California. They are at the Travel Centers of America in Ontario, at Port of Long Beach Tidal Logistics Services, and at Wilmington, about 1.5 miles away. And after this meeting, I'm going to go give my 3rd tour of the week to executives from various fleets and OEMs who are interested in seeing these things. So we're filling trucks there. We've got drayage trucking happening. We've got car shipping happening. And I got to see my first hydrogen truck traffic jam. I saw one truck that was carrying cars, and then behind it, there was a truck queued up that was going to carry a green China shipping drayage container to its warehouse. So there's a lot of exciting things happening at those sites. There's demand from the trucks, demand for molecules, and demand for tours from everybody in the industry. So keep up the good work, everybody, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. That was helpful. Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to commend Brenner for his excellent description of the hydrogen color rainbow. And in a perfect world, that would be the last time we ever heard that explanation. I fully agree that carbon intensity should be the metric that we're using. It's the metric that's been adopted by the federal government. We'll see it propagate around the US, and the colors just obfuscate things and cause room for suspicion, rightly so. So carbon intensity needs to become like octane numbers. It needs to be something that we all feel comfortable with and begin to recognize. The other thing I would say for pricing is that in the bus world, and I think those fleets have a similar profile as trucking fleets, right now they're buying liquid hydrogen at about $8 a kilogram. We've heard loud and clear they want to see $5 a kilogram or less. That gets them to where they feel diesel equivalency is, which is reasonable because for those who don't know, a gallon of diesel has about the same energy as a kilogram of hydrogen, but you go about twice as far. So $5 a kilogram hydrogen, roughly speaking, is something like $2.50 a gallon for diesel. And when you're talking about commercial prices, that's about where we want to be. So thank you.
Okay, we have come to the end of the folks who've raised their hand. Tyson, were there any other questions you wanted to pose to the panel before we move on?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, I think Tim maybe even cleaned up on the price that fleets would need to see, to make this market start to work. I think the bus operators are probably a good proxy, unless anybody else has anything to add there. But I see a lot of head nods from the people who are visible.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we're going to move now, make sure I get this right, over to...
Wait a minute, Annalisa, since we do have maybe another... Oh no, we're past the agenda, sorry. We'll do open comments at the end, sorry.
Yeah, right, okay. And so our next topic is fueling protocol and standards. Tyson, did you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I think this, so we have a lot of fleets potentially on the line, and, with Jennifer and Jay, the codes and standards, and there's, really the main question is kind of, maybe you guys can tee it off, but like, what should fleets know about codes and standards, where they sit, with medium and heavy duty fueling, what questions should they be asking? And maybe I see you, Jennifer, it looks like maybe you can jump in, brief overview, kind of where we are, where we're going as an industry.
Yeah. So really the fueling protocol for heavy duty is being developed as we speak. That's happening in the ISO realm, and with a couple of other kind of associated standards being produced as well for communications. In the meantime, there is the light duty fueling protocol, which has an option to it to allow for fueling of larger capacity, fuel storage capacity vehicles, to be able to fuel the station has to have the capacity itself, and then have that protocol programmed in. But there are some kind of options that are happening, to kind of fill that gap right now. So it's sort of the state of things. So it's, heavy duty fueling protocol coming, what we call medium duty. And I know if you all know my colleague, Nico, we've had this conversation, vehicle weight class and fueling and protocol should not be intermixed. Unfortunately, that's just kind of what we do, because we talk about sort of a medium duty vehicle as something that would have a larger capacity than a light duty. But, if you look at the light duty protocol, there are categories of compressed hydrogen storage system capacity. And so CHSS, over 10 kilograms would be that newer option for the light duty protocol. And that will be at a fueling rate that is equivalent to the light duty currently. So one of the things we're looking at for heavy duty is, of course, a much faster, more molecules going into the vehicle in a shorter period of time. So higher fueling speeds. That's one of the kind of technical things being worked out.
And maybe the industry members can jump in here too. So if I'm a fleet and I'm purchasing a vehicle or investing in a station, should I be worried about future proofing, or are the codes and standards in a good enough spot where we can kind of move this thing forward without having to upgrade the physical infrastructure or the physical vehicle?
So if I may.
Yeah.
Can I be heard? We're having audio problems.
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I support everything Jennifer said. This is an area that is currently being aggressively addressed in the codes and standards world. I mentioned a little bit earlier about this. The ISO people were working on a working group called 24, which used to be fueling stations, is now fueling protocols. So I invite the community to pay attention to that. Also, the GTR Global Technical Regulations, which addresses vehicles, is moving into heavy duty vehicles in a major way. Both of those are international standards. Both of those will map themselves to the United States local standards. We're working the problem. The Working Group 24 is on a 3-year time frame. We've already seen 1 year pass. The GTR is expected to go public within maybe the next calendar year. So these things are right around the corner. And Jennifer's absolutely right. It's really not heavy duty. It's high flow rate. It's it's high flow rate and a lot. So the 2601 SAE standard for light duty vehicles is set at like 60 grams a second. For the heavy duty high flow rate, we're 10 times that number. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking at.
And we're also working on projects for flow rates that are kind of in between that. And, there's options. I would say to Tyson's question, for a fleet operator, you probably have to have some conversations and kind of make some arrangements at this point right now. But it's not impossible.
Agreed. The Working Group 24 standard, which will be a 1988-5, I believe it is separated out into 3 parts. It's kind of the foundation for what you want for a protocol. I call it pre-normative. A definition and communications, which allows the tank and the fueling station to talk to each other. And then finally, the actual protocol itself. I expect that 1 and 2 to be pretty stagnant once we get the written, but 3 will be a protocol depending on whether it be medium duty or heavy duty or buses or something of this nature. In my personal wildest dream is we will get rid of the notion of a protocol and just allow the communication issues to deal with what's necessary to fill the tank. Now, that's not going to happen tomorrow. That's my wildest dream. Thank you.
We've made people raise hands, Jay.
We do have some hands raised, and I'll note too that from the Q&A, we've got some folks that are interested in hearing from the panel about safety protocols and how safety is being addressed in standards.
Safety is top of the list. That's why we write them. So we specifically focus on performance kinds of standards, and performance means that it be safe, and we in fact fill quickly. I'm not sure, without getting into a lot of physics, as to what drives the question. Hydrogen in and of itself has a very impressive safety history. That doesn't mean it can't be improved. We work on that daily.
I'll just add, there's, to the topic of safety in the standards, that is why we write them. And there is a lot of engineering and a lot of validation that goes into those, and really making sure that the information, the data is there to support what's in the standards. So.
Absolutely. The body of standards that are written around science They are supported by science, as opposed to the way we've got the current set of standards for fossil fuels, which is more historic. And we work very, very hard on that. So the international community, and when I say international, it's truly international. We have people, national laboratories here in the United States. We have industries in the United States. We have national laboratories in Europe. We have national laboratories in Australia, all contributing to this exercise.
Okay. I'm going to go to the folks who have their hands raised. James?
Yes, good afternoon again, or morning still. James Dumont Momentum again. I want to focus on the challenges around permitting and the fire code updates for mobile refueling. Many of our largest industrial emission sources, including airports and ports, rely upon mobile refueling. And indeed, because the labor really jurisdictions of where labor can operate, mobile refuelers are critical to the ongoing operations today for how ports and airports operate and refuel their equipment. That needs to be replicated going into the future to enable hydrogen fuel cell technologies to be deployed and adequately fueled on a cost-effective basis. To date, it is my understanding that the local fire codes, which do track closely with the state and international fire codes, would limit a mobile refueler to only a few kilograms before it is forced to become a fully stationary source when delivered to the site. And thus you would have longshoremen driving the equipment to the stationary mobile refueler rather than the mobile refueler coming to the equipment, as is the current model. We are looking to deploy immediately in 2022 multiple hydrogen fuel cell cargo handling equipment demonstrations across the Port of Los Angeles and across multiple terminals. And this is going to impair our ability to demonstrate the full viability of these technologies to model and near and even meet the duty cycle demands within the ports. So we do need help immediately from the state and local agencies to make it so we can demonstrate these technologies today so that we can meet the 2030 goals. Every year that we delay demonstrating the viability of these technologies gives us that, if feasible, out to continue utilizing diesel beyond 2030. So I would like to see us be able to utilize something that enables to fuel at least a full piece of cargo handling equipment, like an RTG or a top handler, which can't be converted to a battery electric technology to date due to the incredible energy demands. So we need support to make it so we can demonstrate these technologies rapidly. So any help we can get as quickly as possible is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. Nico?
Thank you, Annalisa. Good points all made. With regards to the safety, let me start there. We're talking about fuels here. So consider hydrogen also a fuel, has different characteristics, and you need to treat fuels as such. They have high energy content, and the reason they do that is because they need to move vehicles or generate power to make things happen. So in that regards, you've heard comments about codes and standards really exist because of the point of safety, that there are not a lot of people just tinkering around in their backyard or in their garage and put things together. The same issue exists for gasoline, the same issue exists for diesel, both in the production and the use side of things. We've heard several stories in the past about biodiesel and renewable diesel, about fire departments not being prepared for it because that has developed into a kind of like a inventor-like industry where everyone was trying to make their own biodiesel and or renewable diesel in places where fire departments had no clue about, like backyard sheds, as well as on the countryside places where suddenly things occur that nobody ever expected. So let's start with that. With regards to the safety related to fueling, we're mostly talking here about trucks. That's the focus of this regulatory development. The goal for the codes and standards community is to create incompatibility between heavy duty and light duty, for that reason that you're transferring a much larger amount of fuel faster. So to address the safety situation, so there is no confusion, and there are not situations where there's an unsafe situation that occurs when potentially a light duty vehicle is fueled with a heavy duty flow rate, as well as the amount of fuel coming across from a station to a vehicle. So that is the goal, and that's what Jennifer and Jay both touched on, and I think several others mentioned as well. With regard to hydrogen as a fuel, firefighters have shown that when they know about the characteristics of hydrogen, they are, I wouldn't say they're comfortable, but let's say they have a level of understanding now about hydrogen. They are never comfortable with any fuels, so let's add that. But it's just like now they know what it is, so they know what to do, and that's really what's important in the firefighting profession. Is like, if you know what you're dealing with, you can fight it. You can go to movies on that as well if you want to get some references there. With regard to mobile fueling, I heard that comment, or temporary fuelers. That does exist already. Air Liquide may be able to provide some more insights in that, as well as Air Products. That also happens at a larger scale. Buses have been fueled with mobile fuelers. I realize that in the ports it's maybe slightly different, but that's not so much. That's more because of adopted rules on how things go with the folks operating the vehicles and the workforce. So that's maybe a broader discussion than just like this is how it has to happen. With regard to fueling protocols, NREL is maybe a good to go to entity. I have not heard their name dropped yet, but they're working both on the development of H70 or 700 bar fueling protocols for trucking fast fueling, as well as the interface, and also on H35 or 350 bar fueling for heavy duty vehicles. And both efforts are intended to develop a fueling protocol that can be used in public fueling. Not necessarily behind the fence, because you have some more restrictive access, so you don't have to worry about it as much, and you know what your fleet consists of. So I'll add that, and I'll stop now because I can keep talking about this topic because I've been around in this area for a while.
Thank you, Nico. I had mentioned a ISO Working Group 24. The NREL team is part of that exercise. So that piece is embedded in what will hopefully be not too long, the output from the ISO work.
Thank you. So we're coming towards the end of our time, and I want to enter sort of a lightning round. We're going to take, we have Eddie, Tim, and Ashish with their hands up on this topic, and I'll let that blend into the medium heavy duty and light duty multimodal fueling. There we're looking for where there are thoughts about whether that's feasible, particular suggestions about what might work in that arena. And I want to make sure that we leave 10 minutes at the end for me to wrap up and kind of summarize what we've been hearing today and some next steps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eddie.
Thanks, Annalisa. So one thing that was lightly touched upon, and I want to kind of dive in a little deeper, is the number of fuel delivery trucks that are in use today in California. Most retail fueling stations get their fuel via a tanker truck that handles combustible or flammable liquids. It's, I think their MC306 is the spec. But for hydrogen, you're going to be using a cryo tank. The cost of those trucks is going to be a lot more than a flammable or combustible tanker truck. And so what CARB needs to understand is what's the total number of fuel tanker trucks that are in service today, and how are those going to be replaced in terms of timing and cost? Is CARB going to subsidize the conversion from an MC306 to an MC338, a cryo tanker truck? And is it a 1-to-1 ratio? In other words, can you deliver the same amount of fuel with a cryo tanker truck that you can with a non-cryo, a liquid fuel tanker truck? Just want to put that out there. Oh, and also, I know we have people in the industry who are attendees today, and maybe they can put something in the chat or ask a question on. They might have more details on that.
Thank you. And up next is Tim.
Thanks. I want to echo the comments from Momentum on reducing those regulatory barriers on mobile fuelers. I know that can be problematic, and we do need to engage with labor groups to get them comfortable with hydrogen. Regarding health and safety, we've been operating vehicles in public service on public roads for over 2 decades, and we've gotten very comfortable with hydrogen as a fuel when viewed as a fuel, as Nico mentioned. education needs to be done for permitters and agencies and community groups about the safety of hydrogen relative to our liquid fossil fuels. The toxicity is zero, and that's a big deal at fueling stations. Your average fueling station for cars or trucks can't help but spill some of that and evaporate some of that fuel, and there's real impacts on the surrounding communities. Hydrogen doesn't have that issue. It's also doesn't pool. When it's released, it's not only diffuse, but it's also buoyant. So there's some great safety aspects there. And relative to battery vehicles as well, hydrogen separates the energy storage from the power production. And that means if you've got a problem with your drivetrain, you can shut off and isolate your fuel. You can also remove that energy in a controlled fashion. Unfortunately, with batteries, you're packing it all into the same thing. And once you've corrupted that electrical circuit, it's very hard to take the energy out of batteries, particularly in something like a combustion event. So educating and letting people know about these positive characteristics for hydrogen will go a long way to getting people comfortable and moving this along a little faster. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashish?
Thank you. I wanted to steer back to fueling standards. As an infrastructure provider, we're fuel agnostic, right? Whether it's megawatt charging, it's 700 bar fueling, or 350 bar fueling. How can we standardize to one pressure for the heavy duty market? From an OEM side, we hear both, right? 350 bar and 700 bar. CNG somehow found its way to 3600 psi. Ultimately, the cost of having both, there is a cost and it gets passed down to the pump. How can we avoid that, or is that not the goal? Because regardless, we're ready for both. We have no issues with that. But should the end goal be to standardize to one pressure for heavy duty?
I can speak to that. The standards and codes communities will not standardize to a particular set of pressures. We won't, because we do not want to stymie innovation. So the codes and standards that are being written today look at the scope of things more on a performance basis rather than a specific pressure space. Jennifer, you want to comment?
I was going to actually comment on, I know I mentioned earlier outreach for AHJs and stuff, but there are resources available for AHJs, for first responders, and a lot of safety resources available through the Center for Hydrogen Safety and the h2tools.org website. I think it's a matter of people knowing that it's there. So socializing that is really important, but I wanted to mention it on this forum. That said, there's always more to do, but I wanted to let people know those are available.
And I would assume that in terms of standardizing on a pressure, that's going to be driven by the market. We're seeing that in on the vehicles, on the battery electric side, where on the DC fast charge side, we're gravitating towards the CCS standard as a connector. I think that the government is generally reluctant to standardize in code or through regulation on a particular technology unless we get, or until we get to a point where there's a majority, and at that point we're looking for a way to streamline our investments in that technology. That's what's happening on the connector side for batteries. So if there's a strong push towards 700 bar for trucks, that's going to be dictated by what customers expect and what manufacturers are producing to meet their customers' expectations. But definitely something to start getting folks talking about.
Now, with due respect, the code community is very concerned about making sure that things are done safely. So we don't want to have a truck with 35 megapascal tanks drive up to a 70 megapascal filling station and fill it. That's a no-no.
Okay, Pete?
Thank you very much. I almost didn't actually raise my hand for this until Ashish brought up this question. So thank you very much for bringing that up. You know, again, absolutely not as an advertisement for Hyundai, but I will just use us as an example of some of the trade-offs that we look at when we're considering things like, for example, pressure. We are actually very agnostic when it comes to this question. I'll give you an example. In our fleet of trucks in Switzerland, we have approaching 100 trucks there with about 1.5 million miles of traveled as of June. Those trucks are 350 bar systems, driving range of about 250 miles. Here, we're thinking more that 700 bar makes sense because of the trade-offs that I think force a need for more range and more onboard fuel. And given the potential impact on the package layout in the vehicle, the physical cube that the onboard fuel has to fit within, 700 bar makes more sense. That also has an impact on, for example, the vehicle size and the structure required to hold the tanks, and ultimately the weight, which, as we know, will have an impact on the payload capacity, the functional payload capacity of the combination. So given all of that, 700 bar tends to be where we're pushing with regards to the fuel for North American commercial vehicles, heavy duty commercial vehicles. And then you didn't mention this, but liquid hydrogen is something that we're cautiously, I'll just say this, we're cautiously optimistically interested or intrigued by it. And like I said, we're agnostic. I mean, and if it makes sense from a vehicle performance and trade-off analysis standpoint to move with what's a better solution, then we're prepared to do that. But having said that, we're in a bit of a vacuum as far as that goes, because we also understand the impact that all of that has, or the impact that infrastructure has on any of those choices. Not to mention the whole question of light duty versus medium and heavy duty commercial vehicle. So that's just to give you a little bit of insight as to what an OEM might be thinking about when it comes to that kind of a choice. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll transition now to reviewing everything we talked about. I really appreciate all of the input from everyone. This has been a very constructive and useful conversation. Kathy, can you scroll up to the top of the agenda? Thanks. So I apologize for my very aggressive cat who's meowing in the background. He's being a brat today. So we talked about station location planning. A lot of folks brought up identification of corridors with an important caveat that while corridors are important, it's also important to make sure that we're serving where fleets need to go, and those aren't always on corridors. We brought up the several efforts to identify and prioritize corridors, both the AB 671, which CTC, California Transportation Commission, is heading up for California, as well as federal efforts with the infrastructure bill to identify corridors that are a priority for funding. Within that conversation also was brought up the concern about siting of stations in communities that don't necessarily welcome them, the NIMBY concern. This brought up the need for education for communities. And I heard a couple of volunteers, I've made note of them, thank you, to start up an effort to educate communities about the impacts and benefits of hydrogen station development. Let's see. And on the timelines for hydrogen station development, we heard that we could see stations being developed in the 30-month or year-and-a-half timeline, and that we're seeing a dramatic increase in hydrogen fuel production both inside the state and expected outside of the state. This got us into a conversation about the types of hydrogen that are being produced, zero carbon, low carbon, and traditional hydrogen, with some healthy debate on whether we should be supporting all hydrogen or really focus now on zero carbon or very low carbon hydrogen, with an eye towards avoiding stranded assets in those investments. And we also heard that we should expect to see very low carbon. I'm trying to avoid using green hydrogen, the color system. Very low or zero carbon hydrogen imported into California, as it may be easier to see large scale production outside of California, but hopefully we can see increased growth in that in California as well. And when asked about the cost of hydrogen delivered to customers, we had several participants indicate that they foresee cost parity with diesel by mid-decade. And putting some numbers to that, we heard that today hydrogen is available at $8 per kilogram. To be cost competitive, fleets would like to see $5 per kilogram. On the codes and standards, a good conversation about the development pace of codes and standards for fast fueling or high flow fast refueling of trucks. And that's on a 3-year time scale. We're already 1 year into that, and this is aggressively under development. And that those standards are really based in safety. And it sounds like there would be value in doing outreach around safety. As Jennifer pointed out, the Fuel Cell Partnership has done a lot of work on materials that train AHJs, that fire officials and communities about the safety and codes and standards around hydrogen fueling. And it might be worth having a conversation about and starting an activity to sort of re-socialize those materials with a focus on the implementation for medium and heavy duty fleets. So a lot of good conversation here and some, I think, action items coming out of this conversation. So I very much appreciate everybody's contributions. As we've mentioned, this is recorded and it will take some time to be posted on YouTube as we have to develop the closed captioning. And we're also saving the Q&A we've been answering questions as they come up. And I very much appreciate huge gratitude to the staff, especially Brandon Rose, who's been answering those Q&As as we go. And thank you to our partner agencies, GO-Biz, CEC, CPUC for being with us today, contributing to the conversation and the Q&A. So with that, I will close out today's meeting and look forward to our continued conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you. Great work, group.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.